Night lingered beneath the beams of the Tower of the Hand, like a held breath, stale with rushes, wax smoke, and the coppery tang of the maester's tinctures. The city's heat had risen through stone and timber all day, and would not let go. It pressed against Eddard's stark skin until his linen clung to him, and each motion carried the dull ache in his shattered leg up into his hip. He had long since sent his last men to their pallets and doused all but one candle. That last flame guttered low and steady, a small bright thing that seemed to hold back everything else by the stubborn fact of existing. The door opened without a knock. He had not barred it. Renly Baratheon entered on silent souls that were not, for all his youth, careless. The green of his cloak drank what little light there was and made him a moving shadow. A pin of antlers caught the candle flame and winked, jaunty and precise as the man who wore it. Behind him came a slighter shadow that Ned knew by the easy grace of his posture. Sir Loras Tyrell, hair bound back and face set, his hand resting on the throat of his sword, as if it were a docile hawk, ready to fly at a whistle. Renly stopped when he was 3 paces in. Courtesy held then, as it had 100 times when they had faced each other across the small council table, with its litter of tallies and petitions. He bowed, and the edge of one antler brushed his hair. The gesture had its usual polish, but the stillness afterward was new. Renly was like a summer breeze most days, all laughter and effortless charm. Tonight there was weight upon him, a weather change out of the south that had found stone and settled. "My Lord Hand," Renly said softly. Even his voice had learned the dark. "May I come further?" "You are here, Lord Renly," Ned said, and the northern bluntness in the words did not disguise the fatigue that scraped their edges. "We do not stand upon ceremony in my chamber. The hour is late." "Late and unkind," Renly agreed. He did not look at the bed set aside for the Lord Hand, or at the chair with the cane propped against it. His gaze fastened on Ned's face with a steadiness that was not unkind. "There was no other hour. Our brother." He did not say Robert. He did not need to. The word was in the room, residue on every surface. "He is failing. I have seen him. If you have not, forgive me, but do not go. The smell will cling to you." Ned let out air he had not known he held. He did not need to see to know. He had been with dying men before, too many to pretend otherwise. They all had the same hush collecting around them, the same slow erosion of all that had animated them, as if some invisible tide withdrew and left behind the shell of a man and the moan of surf on a far pebble beach. "I have seen him," Ned said. "The boar did what 1,000 enemies could not. He hunted as he would have lived, and he bleeds as he has bled our coffers." The words were harsher than he meant, and he closed his mouth on the next ones. Renly's mouth flickered. "He hunted as he loved," he said at last, with a tiny shrug of the blade-sharp shoulders. "Hard and heedless. Hard and heedless men leave others to gather what is broken." Ned reached for the chair and braced himself into it, the leg a plank of pain. "Say what you came to say." Renly looked to Loras then, a look that lasted the span of one breath, and returned transformed. "We move," he said, and each word was quiet enough to be mistaken for caution, if you did not listen to its core. "Tonight. Before the Queen rips the paper our brother made into shreds and feeds it to the brazier. Before she calls Joffrey king and the gold cloaks gather to her scent. Before the Lannisters remember that fear is a discipline. And to what end do we move?" Ned asked. He kept his voice as flat as the north. "Our brother named me protector of the realm until his heir, until the lawful succession is set to rights. You want speed to make that paper more than ink. Good. To what end?" Renly's hand rose, and the antler pin gleamed again. "To this end, the Queen confined, her children in good keeping, the doors barred, the Red Keep bound to the King's peace, the city watch on our side by more than a smile. You have the seal, my Lord Hand. You have Robert's letter with more seal than sense. If you delay until dawn, she wins. If you thrust now, we win. Now." "And who is this we?" Ned said. And now the ache in his leg and the weight in his chest found their eldest friend, the flinty edge of truth, the King's hand acting in the King's last command. Or Lord Renly, who would be protector in all but name, girded by the power of Highgarden. No. Call it the realm, if the word sits straighter, Renly said. His easy laugh was absent. Something else was in its place. We do not have the leisure for pretty speeches. I will tell it plain. I can place 800 swords in the yard below the Tower of the Hand within the hour, and twice that at the Gate of the Gods by dawn. If I am seen to do this in your name, with the king's seal, the city will follow. The Hound will not love it, and Barristan will not smile, but the gold cloaks will mass where the copper flows. I know men. I know crowds. They bend toward certainty the way a field of wheat bends to wind. Give them that wind. Bend thou all. And when the wind settles, what then? Ned asked, though he knew. Distant thunder gathered. He had smelled 1,000 storms and 1,000 autumns. Stannis is the king's brother, the elder. The law is as winter is, cold and unyielding. He is next. Then so. At the name, Renly's face did not move, but Loras's hand tightened reflexively upon the sword hilt until leather creaked. Renly said, "We are not debating a wives' feast in the Stormlands. We are curbing wolves. Stannis will be a law written in iron letters, and no man alive will bend it. Do you think that wins hearts in this city? Do you think this court, this hotbed of flatterers and men who owe their wealth to the Queen's father, will kneel sweetly to a man who measures out his bread by the grain? They will not. They will wait and conspire, and by waiting and conspiring, they will create the blood you would spare. Now, what I would spare most of all are my daughters," Ned said. He did not mean to bring them into the clearing where the men stood with their words, but they came all the same. Sansa's eager face, Arya's narrow eyes. They smelled of candles and lavender today, or of sweat and practice wood. They were the measure of all things. They are here. Winterfell is far, and the roads are broken by men with lion banners who do as they will. Whatever we do, Lord Renly, it will be with their safety ahead of glory. Then? Renly nodded, as if willing to concede any point that was put to him in that tone, so long as the current carried them on. Then you see, I am right. Sansa and Arya do not reach the Trident if Cersei rules this castle by morning. She will place them in mother-soft rooms and call them hostages by sweeter names. Give me 1 hour, and my men will steady the walls around your girls. We can make a prison more gentle than hers. We can make it seem a protection. And no. The law, Ned said, stubborn even as the first hairline crack opened inside the word, is not a thing to be placed aside because it is inconvenient. Renly took a breath. Then do not set it aside, he said. Set it to work. You hold the seal. Name me commander of the city watch. Name me your sword and your mailed fist. Name what you like. Send your ravens to Dragonstone, with your lordly hand and your title made large upon the vellum. They will fly regardless of whose boots beat the yard below. Stannis can have his letters. We will have the city. When he comes, if he comes, we will parley. You will stand between hard iron and soft green, and keep both from breaking. Many. Ned closed his eyes. The heat pressed against his lids and turned the world red. He knew the thing Renly did not say aloud. There was foolishness in believing that the man who rose with 800 swords at dawn would hand back the keys of the city to an elder brother who scowled at him. The Reach did not send armies to paint tapestries. When men moved, they had reasons, and reasons were seeds of war. He opened his eyes. I will not crown you, he said. Hear that now. I will not. If I move at all, I move to hold this seat for the king's lawful heir. That heir is not Joffrey, if the world be right. It is Stannis. I hear, Renly said quickly, seizing the foothold. He was good at that. Hear me in turn. The crown is another day's argument. We thrust tonight, or we watch the Queen hold a public burning of your paper, and call that law. Loras Tyrell's voice, smooth as a whetstone, entered for the first time. We have been careful, my lord Hand, he said, his chin lifted. The men we would bring into the keep are sworn. Not only with purse, though a man's purse anchors his oath more surely than any parchment, but with preferment. The watch has no love for the Queen's cousins. Janos Slynt would take the sky for his sigil if it paid him. We have laid the ground. I speak plain because there is no time to varnish it. Ned watched the young knight's face and found there none of the boyish glow that had charmed half the court. There was calculation, and behind it, a steady purpose that was not all ambition. No one had ever accused the Tyrells of lacking a gardener's eye for seasons. They could read harvest from weather. He thought of Mace Tyrell's great belly and soft hands, of the way they hid a mind that could count carts and granaries, as well as any northern steward. The Reach had been fat for 1,000 years and did not intend to starve. Renly was their way to keep from starving under Lannister iron or Baratheon iron of the sterner mold. Time, he said at last. Not to them so much as to the old gods that did not live in this hot city except in his memory. It is never a friend in King's Landing. I will not sit and watch the queen as you say. I am not blind. His hands had clenched on the arms of his chair until a nail tore. He did not feel it. I will not crown you, he repeated, because he must put a fence around his own heart if not around the city. I will move to hold the keep and present Stannis his due upon his coming. You will be my hand upon the hilt, and by all you hold dear, Lord Renly, you will keep your men leashed. Renly bowed, and something like relief glimmered in the line of his shoulders. Leashed, he said, until the horn is blown. We do it quiet. We do it clean. He looked to Loras. The knight slipped away without sound, like a cat on rails of air. Renly remained a moment more. There are hands that would do this with more guile and less frankness, he said then, a hint of rue in the tilt of his head. Littlefinger would have sold you a safer path, if such a thing exists here. But you do not like his fingers near your purse, and I have never liked them near my throat. Never smile. Nuns. Ned's mouth tugged by a ghost of a smile. No one in the north trusts a man who smiles when he lies, and no one at this court trusts a man who does not. We are ill-matched to this city, you and I. Then let us bully it into our shape, while it still can be bullied. I will go. He hesitated in the doorway, candlelight painting one half of his face and the dark claiming the other. If the law is winter, my lord, then summer must make its case while there is heat. We will meet in the yard in half an hour. Bring the seal. When he was gone, the room's quiet returned with a thud, as if the air itself exhaled. Ned sat in it for the count of a minute's heartbeats. He thought of hot kitchens below, and the smell of onions, of rattle of dice beyond a cask, of the city sprawled around them with its ankles in the muddy river and its head leaning, greedy, toward the sky. He thought longest of the weirwood at Winterfell, pale and patient, and of the godswood here that had no tree, only a carved stone face blackened by smoke to stand for what could not grow in this soil. He wanted very much to go there. He did not go. He crossed to the small table, where the king's letter lay heavy with wax and his own signet beside it. The stag's head stamped in red was stark and crude. The seal cracked at one edge when it was affixed too hastily in a hand that had never learned patience. Robert had not looked up when he pressed it down. He had been gritting his teeth against pain and thinking perhaps of another boar, or another woman, or another flagon. Ned had taken the letter because it was the thing he could hold on to before all the other things slipped. He took up the seal. His hands were steady. He did not trust himself to trust anyone else with it. When he went to fetch his cloak, the cane was where he had left it. He disliked it. It made him the sort of man who needed leaning. But he had learned long ago that to despise a necessary tool was a stupid pride. He swept the cloak around his shoulders. The gray of it was as drab as old snow. He let the candle gutter out behind him. The keep at that hour was a warren of long shadows and the faint, constant sounds that cities never lose. A snore carried oddly by a stairwell, a drip from a cistern, the cluck of some bird-witted hen that had found a window ledge in the heat's confusion and made a nest of it. The men he passed in the corridor were his own or Renly's. They stood with the new tension of men who have decided to do a thing and are waiting for the moment to bite it. Jacks and knives lived in their hands like old friends. Some wore borrowed cloaks of the watch, insignia hastily pinned with a flourish and a bribe. Janos Slynt's name floated in the murmurs like a stone in a stream. Ned caught a glimpse of him in the yard, thick about the jowls, eyes that never stopped measuring. Renly was beside him, speaking low. A chest had been opened on a trestle. In the dark, It could have been onions. It was not. Varys arrived as if conjured by Ned's doubt. There was no sound to announce him, but the sudden curtain of a scent, spice and powder, as if he made armor of perfume. He bobbed. Not quite a bow, not quite a mockery of one. His hands were soft pale birds folded upon his belly. His eye slid from the seal in Ned's hand to the men in the yard to the open chest, and then returned without having seemed to move at all. "My lord Hand," Varys purred. "The night is restless." "You don't sleep?" Ned said. "Not in this city. The stones themselves plot." Varys' lips twisted. "You move with a speed that is admirable in a man of—" He glanced at the cane. Ned waited for the barb. "Resolve. Say what you came to say." Varys sighed, a sound like silk torn very slowly. "I will say nothing you do not know. The Queen has sent for certain men she calls her own. She has whispered in their ears words like loyalty and family, which are charms that make lesser men their creatures. She will attempt to take the boy to the throne before the morning meat is cold. You intend to bar that way with the city's own steel. Very well. I am here to ask that you do it in such a fashion that there is a city left afterward. Barricades are excellent at keeping in fires with men behind them waving torches. Men shall. I am not here to burn, Lord Varys," Ned said, "nor to rule by fear. I mean to hold by right. Do you stand against that? Against right?" Varys toyed with the air. "I am a eunuch, my lord. I stand where I can continue to stand." Then the pretense fell from his face like a mask set aside, and the thing beneath, tired, anxious, old not in years but in knowledge, looked out. "I do not know what will be left if the Lannisters rule this city unchecked by mourning. Children suffer first, and those who cannot carry a sword. I have had enough of that in my life. Send for Sir Barristan Tartei. He values parchment more than most. He will listen when you read that letter. And do not set the Hound against his own heart if you can avoid it. He is loyal to a fault, but not to the Queen. He is loyal to the places inside himself that have been burned. Such men can be moved by a different fire, if you place it with care." "Do you advise me as my friend or as the realms?" Ned asked. "Us both," Varys said, almost impatient, and then drew in his skirts as if he had surprised himself by the truth. "I have friends in neither place to spare." When Varys drifted away again, Ned could not say walked, because the man contrived to seem always mid-glide. The yard gathered itself around the moment that had been rising all night. Renly spoke to Janos Slynt. The captain of the watch nodded with careful enthusiasm and went to shout orders that his men took for their own. Gold cloaks were attied. Their oaths were a net that could be knotted and untied with the proper coin. Men in Reach greens borrowed the color of the gold cloaks and blended among them until the yard was a new thing. Not quite the watch, and not quite Renly's, but some artifice creature that drew breath in time with both. Sir Barristan Selmy came because Ned sent for him, and because honor could still be summoned by the proper words. He stood straight as a lance, the white of his cloak ridiculous in that hot dark, until you looked long enough to see that the man wore it, so it seemed fitting to any place. He listened to the letter. He looked from Ned's face to the seal and back again, and he did not say Robert's name aloud either. That belonged to another room. "By this," he said, weighing the letter with his eyes rather than his hand, "the hand rules until the king's will be fulfilled. If the Queen intends a thing that breaks with that, it is treason. If you intend a thing that holds to it, it is law. I am not a lawyer." His mouth quirked, a dry, mild thing that perhaps only Ned saw. "But I am a knight, and a knight of the King's Guard. The law is a better thing to guard than a whim." "Now, you will stand with me," Ned said. "I will stand with the law," Barristan replied, which was the same as yes and different as no. He bowed, as to the letter, as much as to Ned. "If it comes to swords, my men will draw to defend the king's peace." "Tell me, it will not come to swords." "I cannot give you lies," Ned said. "I can promise I will not be the first to draw." "That may be enough to save us," Barristan said, and crossed himself with the sign of a stag. Habit could be its own liturgy. They moved without flourish. Loras Tyrell did not ride in with trumpets. He went barefoot down the servants' way with a dozen picked men in armor, muffled under dark cloaks, and laid his hand upon the outer postern as if it were a lover's shoulder. He smiled at the guard and told some quiet joke that made the man remember a cousin in the Reach and laugh. And then the guard was sleeping on his feet while Loras's men took his pike and passed it from hand to hand like a gift. Janos Slynt placed 300 of the watch in the yard and another 300 at the main gates, and then succumbed to the peculiar compulsion of men who have been bought to discover what else they can extract. He asked Renly for a title. Renly promised him words as sweet as sugar plums at dawn, and the man seemed to taste them already. Inside the keep, the corridors filled and emptied with men who moved with a newly learned care. Pages were roused and sent, their bare feet pattering like rain. Doors were tested with hands, not battering rams. Various little birds ran with messages and ran back with the rooms of the queen drawn like a map in chalk on the inside of their minds. Ned allowed Renly to draw those lines upon the air and point. He kept his own attention on 2 rooms only. The one where Sansa slept among embroidered pillows that made a garden she had not planted, and the one where Arya lay in a tangle of sheet and limb. The wooden sword Syrio had ruled must never be out of her reach, tucked into the space between mattress and wall. He sent trusted men to stand near each, as if they were recalling a story of their own daughters. And he did not breathe freely until one of them returned, and said that the girls had not been aroused, that they had slept through the first careful inch of the storm. Cersei moved more quickly than any of them hoped. She woke as if a string had been plucked far off. Women like her were tuned to power's vibrations and heard their shifting through 10 walls. She came into the corridor with hair unbound, and a robe that was not decent but was decency's dagger. 2 cousins with lion brooches glittered at her shoulders, and 2 Kingsguard behind them in white, that looked like winter's false snow. When she saw Janos Slynt's men, she did not start, which told Ned what he needed to know about how often she had looked at the watch, and seen numbers rather than faces. She smiled at Ned as if he had been a guest late to a feast and gone astray in the corridors. "Lord Stark," she said in a voice that made the words pearls on a thread. "What an ungallant hour. Do you come to sit at my son's bedside? He sleeps." The word had a caress in it. Joffrey was always more boy to her when she wanted to make men forget what else he was. Ned looked at Barristan, not Cersei, and handed him the letter. "By the king's will and seal," he said, and from somewhere pain lent him more north. "I hold this castle and the city beyond until the lawful succession is settled. You and yours will remain in your chambers until the hand commands otherwise. No harm will come to you while you obey. No harm will come to your children. This is solemn, before gods and men. Have you heard me, Lady Cersei?" "Then Swan." She did not take the letter. Her eyes slid over it as if paper were beneath her. Her mouth's corner lifted in something that had often, in court, passed for amusement. "I heard you say you mean to be king," she said softly, "and that you have chosen which of my husband's brothers you will throw your sword behind. My father will hear it too. He is a man who prefers to hear such things from lips rather than ravens." "I have chosen the law," Ned said, more to himself than to her. "The law has a father as well." She returned. "His name is Gold." "She is stalling," Renly said, very low at his shoulder. "Barristan." "Lady Cersei," Barristan said, and in his voice lay all the winters of his service. "I have been charged with the king's peace. I must ask you to withdraw to your rooms. If you refuse, I must require it." Cersei's eyes flicked to him, and for an instant betrayed, what? Hurt? Offense? It was gone as quickly as it had arrived. She shrugged, almost lazily, and began to turn with a rustle. "Come, Joff," she said over her shoulder, and only then did Ned understand. She had brought the boy, small still in a nightshirt that made him look ridiculous and dangerous at once. His hair bright as straw, his mouth working as if there were something bitter under his tongue. He had been hidden behind one of the Kingsguard's shoulders. The boy took 2 steps with a defiance that he thought masked his hesitation. When he saw the wall of gold cloaks in the yard and the men at the doors and Renly's green, he stopped. The air filled up with the small sound of his breath, too quick. "You are not king," Ned said with the gentleness with which one speaks to a frightened colt. "Not yet, Joffrey. When your uncle Stannis—" "Uncle?" the boy spat. He was good at that. His face could become an expression as if it had opened a chest and selected the one shape it wanted. "I am the king. My mother says I am the king. My father—" "Your father lies dying," Renly said, too sharp, and was out of courtesy for an instant. Cersei's head turned, and hatred entered her eyes like a cat into a room it had always owned, but had not walked through in some time. Ned put down the seal and took his cane in both hands. "We will not quarrel in a corridor," he said. He could feel the moment narrowing. It wanted to become a blade. "Lady Cersei, take the prince back to his chamber. Sir Meryn. Sir Boros. Do your duty and escort them. The hand commands it, under seal." Sir Boros Blount twitched in a way that told Ned he was more pig than knight. Sir Meryn Trant looked from face to face as men do, who believe that somewhere is a queue, and that their safety resides in finding it first. They did not move. It was Barristan who moved, a single step, his hand touching the hilt of his sword, not to draw it, but as if to remind it that he remembered where it was. "Go," he said to them. And there was something in that single syllable that belonged to a battlefield, where banners tangle in the wind and men step into the space where they die because a voice has told them to. Blount swallowed and Bow bumbled. Trant, slower, placed his hand upon the boy's shoulder. Joffrey thrust the hand away with a snarl that would have made a hound proud. "Do not touch me," he hissed, and looked at Ned as if he would set him alight by will. "You are a traitor. You think to steal what is mine. My grandfather will pull your guts out like ropes." Ned looked at the boy and saw 100 futures. In too many of them, this boy sat a throne. He heard, somewhere beyond the wall, the river slap like a dirty hand against the quay. "No one will harm you, Joffrey," he said as if he could make it true. "But you are not king today." "What is he then?" Cersei said. "A ward of the hand? Will you teach him his letters in a cold room and feed him oats?" Renly said lightly. "We have sweeter porridge than oats in the south, my lady." And then Loras was there with men at his back, and the corridor trembled on the brink. It did not break. Something human in Cersei, perhaps the fragment that loved her children even more than she loved herself, looked at the wall of men and saw the arithmetic. She pushed Joffrey very gently toward Trant, as if she meant to embrace him, and then did not, and turned back with a smile that was all teeth. "You will remember this," she told Ned. She could have been a woman asking him to remember a song. "You will remember it when you kneel, and your girls—" "You will not speak of my daughters," Ned said, and each word had iron filings in it. "You will not." Her eyes flicked down, and she smiled differently. "Ah," she said softly, "so you still know how to snarl when it is your own cubs." They went. The corridor grew cooler in their absence, though the air had not changed. Ned became aware that his hands hurt. He had been gripping the cane so hard that the wood had left behind half-moons in his palms. He opened his fingers and saw in their grooves the city as a smaller thing than he had believed, able to be pressed by a man's hand. Renly let out a breath and turned to Janos Slynt. "8, the gate of the gods," he said. Brisk again, as if the moment's rawness had been stored away for later use. "Shut it. No one leaves the city without the hands writ. Any man who tries is a fool, and will be treated as a fool." "As you say, my lord," Slynt said, and the lord tacked itself to Renly like a clever fish. He went, hungry for power as a dog for bone. In the hours before dawn they stretched a lattice of control across the Red Keep, and then across the bridges and gates beyond. It was not perfect. Nothing in that city was, not even dawn. But by the time the first true pallor entered the east, carts were stopped for search, and scribes sat at tables with seals to affix and names to write, and lines of people with excuses wound around courtyards and out into streets where fishwives cursed and men grinned and took wagers on who would cry first. The markets woke around the ring of steel as dogs wake around a wagon, yapping and circling and then settling for the shelter of its shadow. Ned refused the offer of a litter and walked, slow as a man forced to move in a dream whose ground he does not trust. The cane gave him its rhythm. Each tap upon stone and cobble was a small metronome that measured pain and purpose. He let Renly show himself in places where showing mattered. On the walls, in the yards, at the gates. And kept himself for the rooms where papers were signed and oaths taken. He set scribes to write to Dragonstone, and to bring him all witnesses to the king's last acts, and to fetch Pycelle to record something more durable than a breath. He wrote to Winterfell, and to the Eyrie, and to River Run, and it seemed to him he could feel, even then, the raven's wings thrumming with the weight of the ink he had placed upon their legs. To Caitlyn he wrote few words and then too many, and none of them said what he wanted. Which was, I am doing what I must, and I will bring the girls home. He sent a man to Syrio Forel, and had him brought to the tower with Arya in his wake. She came with her hair wild, and her eyes bright as a blade fresh from the whetstone. She took in the yard with one swift look, and came straight to Ned as if she might leap and hang from his neck. She did not. She came up short, her open hands closing into fists, then opening again at her sides, a child disciplining herself. "Father," she said, and the word landed in him like a weight that was also something lighter than air. "I have made a cage that is meant to be a room," Ned told her, stooping so that his face was level with hers. "You will hate it, and you will be safe in it. You must stay there until I say otherwise. Obey the men I have set to guard you." "Bender, will Sansa be there?" Arya asked. "Yes. Then she will have to obey me too." A smile scratched at Ned's mouth. "I will hang a commandment on the door for her and have it in my seal," he said. "Do as Arya says." "She will not like that," Arya said. But she was smiling now, and that was a thing he had not imagined seeing this morning. He put his hand on her head, hard, stubborn skull with hair like midnight straw, and held it there a moment as if he could impress upon her something that would remain after death. Some proof that fathers exist. He lifted his hand. "Go," he said, and Syrio bowed, solemn as any bravosi on a stage, and turned with her. Sansa he fetched from her bed. She was full of dreams that had not yet burned off. Her voice was soft and sweet, and not at all suited to the corridor's clatter. "Father," she said, and held out her hands. He took them because he would not refuse her. Her fingers were warm, and fine-boned, and trembled in his. When he told her what he had to tell, her face went blank and full of swan-like tragedy all at once. "But I am to marry the prince," she said, confused and aggrieved, as if he had told her that lemon cakes would never be baked again. "This will upset the queen." "It will upset the queen," Ned agreed. "And that is its virtue." He kissed her brow and felt the youngness of her, the scented powder and the trace of childhood's salt. "Do as I say this morning," he told her. "Do not chatter. Do not stray. If you must cry, do it where your septa can see you, and no one else." He put her with Arya and Syrio, and he set 2 men he trusted outside the door, and told them he would have their heads if a breath of harm came within. As the sun grew itself from a rumor into a thing with heat, the small council convened, thinner than it had been when the day last began. Littlefinger came in with a neatness that defied sleep, each hair obedient, each line of his garment a sentence written in coy ink. He took in Renly's presence by the hearth, and the 5 gold cloaks at the door, and the way Barristan stood slightly nearer to Ned than to the rest, and his smile quoted a line of a song that only he had heard. "I have woken into a play," he said. "Am I given a script, or do I improvise?" "You may read the king's letter," Ned said, and handed it to him because to withhold it would be to begin in suspicion that could not be ended. Littlefinger read it with indulgent concentration, as if it were a petition from a courtier with poor grammar. "Handsome seal," he murmured, and then, when he had to say something of substance, he made his mouth consider the question gravely. "It says what it says, and says it in a way that admits of no quibbles from men of low birth. From men of high birth, there are always quibbles. I admire you for having moved before they could be spoken." "Nandero, will you serve the hand or the queen?" Renly asked cheerfully, as if he were offering a choice between 2 dishes. "Both excellent." "I will serve coin," Littlefinger said just as cheerfully. which is to say, I will serve the city, which contains so very much coin. If the hand will promise me that the city will not burn, I will promise him that I will set my ledgers in his favor. For the present, it is a terrible thing to choose in the first hour of the day. Might we not have a plum to sweeten the decision? Then how? Your plum? Ned said, and the word tasted like math. Is that you continue breathing and counting your breathing. Varys will work the ravens and Pycelle will write the lines. You will find me the men who will not sell their oaths at noon for the coin they took at dawn. Now. Littlefinger's eyes lit. Perhaps he had hoped for jest, and had instead been set a problem to solve. You are discovering that I am in truth invaluable, he said lightly. Very well. I shall go interrogate the city's conscience. He paused at the door and looked back, a glance that touched the seal and Renly's pinned antlers both. Do not be surprised, my lord hand, if your justice has cause to thank my depravity by midday. Few men will die for honor before they have eaten. Many will die to keep their accounts balanced. Dahin. When he was gone, Ned discovered that his shoulders had risen halfway to his ears, and made himself set them down. He could not decide whether he had just fed a snake or collared it. He looked at Renly and found the man looking back with a frankness that did not apologize for its ambition. It is done, Renly said. For now. For now, Ned echoed, because it would be an enemy later if it was not named now. He called for wine he did not want, and water he did, and drank the one and wet his lips with the other. The city sang around them, cries from the market steps, the call of a hawker who insisted that peaches were come early and sweet, the rhythmic thump of a smith somewhere mending a buckle, the clatter of 1,000 lives arranged into a day. It all sounded remarkably like peace, if you did not know what had been held in balance. Robert died when the sun was a white coin thrown high and falling. Pycelle came with the word, his hands trembling as if the vibrations of mortality had run up his arms and taken hold. He wept as a man weeps when he thinks it politic. His tears beaded in his beard and clung. Ned stood and let the announcement pass over him and through him like rain on stone. He had known Robert before they both knew what kings were. He had known the laughter that used to ride behind his brother's words, and the way a boy could throw an arm around another boy and not fear to be seen doing it. He knew what had been lost long ago, and what little remained to honor now. He could summon pity for the king more easily than for the man who had been left when all the rest was used. He sent for a bell to be tolled. He sent for black cloth to be hung. He summoned men to bear the body, and he directed that the queen and her children be told by Barristan and no other, and that no Lannister men be permitted to escort the bier. He signed his name to a proclamation written in Pycelle's round hand, a statement of death and of the hand's roll until the succession be settled by law. He looked at the words until they blurred and became merely shapes that men recognized as authority, and he as obligation. Afterward, the keep felt different. Death had edges and corners. It changed the way sound rebounded from stone. Servants went quiet, as if they feared to attract the attention of the new reality with their noise. Men walked more quickly. The queen's apartments were shut, and a curtain had been drawn across the corridor that led to them with the effective sanctimony of a temple's veil. Ned went to a small room whose window looked toward the river and sat with his hands on his knees. He had not yet allowed himself to think what came next. It came up to him anyway. Stannis at Dragonstone Tetty. Renly, with his antlers shining. The riverlands already bleeding from wounds made before this day, wounds that would not stop simply because a letter had been read. The North reading his words and choosing between patience and pride. Caitlyn. Somewhere between, carrying with her all the webs she had spun for love. Tywin Lannister under his banners, his mouth as thin as a stitch in leather. These were not problems that would yield to a single blow. They were the sort of problems that grew their own lesser problems, like pups. He sent for ink again. He sent for men whose names he knew would not crumble at the first heat. Men of the watch who had kept order at night without turning their faces to the richer alleys. Knights who had no connections to Lion or Rose. Shopkeepers whose words mattered to those who bought their bolts and their grain. He asked them questions and listened to their answers, as if a king's crown rested in the weight of those ordinary sounds. He did not ask them to love him, or the law. He asked which way the wind might blow, and how to build walls that would not be toppled by it. They told him, then with more confidence, that the city bent quickly toward any hand that kept food in it, that there were many men who had grown fat under the Queen's grace, and many more who had grown lean because of it, that the bridges were where tempers frayed when the markets overflowed, that the fish source from upriver was not to be trusted after noon heat. Renly came in when the sun had begun to droop. He had removed his cloak and, in shirt sleeves, looked younger and more dangerous, like a youth who had stolen his elder brother's sword and found, to his delight, that it suited him. "Tyrell men hold the gates," he said without preface. Slint smiles like a man who has eaten an eel whole, and found it agreed with him. "My men have replaced half the guard around the Queen's rooms. Barristan has placed the other half. The Lannister cousins are gnawing their tongues in silence. We have sent word to your allies and mine. There is no word from Dragonstone." "No. There will be," Ned said. He looked to the window. The air had grown only fractionally less oppressive. In the alley below, two children quarreled with cheerful violence over a stick. Stannis counts and counts again. Renly stretched out his legs and crossed them at the ankle, casual and calculated. "And what will he count when he comes? He will count my men and yours, and he will count the way the city does or does not cheer when his banners pass. We have made a peace today, Lord Hand. It is fragile. I will not let it be broken by a man who never learned to smile." "No. You will not break it either," Ned said. He was weary to the bone and to the thought, but he would not leave the line until he had drawn it. "We are not yet at the place where your antlers meet his stag. My duty is to hold the realm until the succession is settled. I will not be swayed from that. Help me hold it." "Helping you hold it," Renly said lightly, "is also helping me hold it. Strange, is it not, how those roads run together so neatly?" He stood. The light cut him into golden shadow. "Sleep, if you can," he said. "Or pretend to. Mourning is a brute that prefers your face unshaven." When he was gone once more, the day loosened its grip enough that Ned felt the ache in his leg, as a single thing rather than a sea. He closed his eyes and, for a moment, he gave himself Winterfell entire. The yard in hoarfrost, the smoke from the chimneys clean and honest and smelling of meat and pine. Bran's laughter when the hounds got too excited, Robb's face strained with the new restraint of a boy who wanted to be a man, Rickon's mad little feet pattering as he chased after a dog 3 times his size. He let that world hold him the space of 5 heartbeats, and then he let it go. He stood and went to see the girls again. The room he had made into their cage had a window that caught no breeze, but Arya had already dragged a bench over to it and climbed upon it and stuck her head out as if the void itself were of interest. Sansa sat with her back straight and her hands folded, her eyes red-rimmed but dry in obedience to his order. They looked up when he entered, and in the small shift of Sansa's mouth and the fierce defiant tilt of Arya's chin, he saw all the choices he had and had not made. "We will go home," he told them. It was not a promise so much as an oath to himself. "Not today, but we will go. Remember that. Everything that happens in this place is a stone upon a road that leads us there." "Done." Sansa blinked slow. "Will the prince still? Will Joffrey?" "The prince," Ned said, and felt the old patience lift its head like a faithful dog. "Is a boy who will not be king today. That is all you need. And Syrio says that when a boy is not a king, he is just a boy," Arya said sagely. "And a boy can be tripped." "Do not trip the prince," Ned said grave, and she grinned despite herself. He touched their faces with his eyes, and then with his hands, and when he left, he told the guards their names again, as if names could become wards against ill. When full dark came, it brought with it a different sort of quiet. The fragile, pricking quiet that follows when a city has been told something enormous and does not yet know what to make of it. Somewhere, a noblewoman screamed at a servant and flung a cup, and the sound went through the keep like a dart. Somewhere else, a man wrote a letter and then thought better of it and burned it over a candle. The smoke wrote a truth upon the ceiling that no one would see. Littlefinger returned once with figures, and again with gossip, and a third time with a simple odd thing. A baker's girl who had seen two men in crimson, with a purse of dragons and an appetite for oil. Varys came with whispers knotted like strings you could pull in the proper order to make the right curtains fall. Renly came and went, his men flowing with him like the texture of a fabric that exults in its own drape. Ned slept at last, or something like it, his head on his arm at the table with the seal beneath his hand as if it could be stolen by ghosts. He dreamed of cold water. He woke with the dawn already in the room, pale as a promise. A bell tolled again somewhere far off. The sound traveled like a flock of birds, startled and then settling. He stood up and felt every year of his life. Before he could decide how to spend that life in the next hour, a man in the watch's cloak came, breathless with the kind of news that insists upon being told 3 times. "Lord Hand," he said. "8 the river, at the fish market gate. There is a man from the west with a lion upon his seal. He demands parley. He says his name is Tyrek Lannister, and that he bears word from Lord Tywin and the Lord Jaime, and a purse to soften the words." The man's eyes were wide, as if he had seen something transgressive, and wanted someone to tell him it was not. Ned nodded once. "We do not parley at the fish market," he said. "We parley in halls made for words, or on fields made for swords. Bring him to the second court, strip him of weapons, and make the men who come with him leave their purses at the gate. Give them slips, that they may collect them upon their exit, so they may not claim we have stolen." He could see Littlefinger's amused look already, and bore it in advance. He went out into the morning wearing a face he had not felt since he was a younger man, and had had to preside over disputes between tenants and the men who hunted his forests without right. It was a face that listened and did not change, because listening had taught it that men loved to see change in the faces of those they petitioned. Tyrek Lannister turned out to be more boy than man, narrow in the shoulders and too proud to be properly frightened. He spoke bravely of his lord grandfather's wrath, and of how the West would rise and make the city remember its place. Ned listened. When the boy ended, he said, "Tell your lord that the city remembers its place. It remembers that it belongs to the king, not to any father. Tell him that the law holds in the keep, and that the hand will enforce it until the king be crowned. Tell him also that the riverlands bleed, and that no man of honor can pretend it is a hunting accident. If he wants peace, let him send those who lit the fires back to their halls. If he wants war, he will have it. I did not choose it, but I will not run from it." Then Tyrek swallowed. He had brought with him the smell of horses and dust, and the odd, clean air of the open road. In his eyes, perhaps, there had been a hope that he would be treated as an envoy, and thus made larger by the function. Ned gave him the dignity of a beau, and the courtesy of safe conduct out of the city, and the boy went away looking smaller than when he had come. "War, then," Renly said, not without relish, at his side. "War, and we in the city. It will be an interesting spring." "Hold your men," Ned said, his eyes on the boys retreating back, and the way the morning light made a path across the court. "Hold your tongue. Hold the gates." "I will hold all that can be held," Renly replied, and for once he was grave. "Hold your Stannis too if you can when he comes with his wagons of parchment and justice. The city does not hunger for justice. It hungers for bread." Dain. Ned thought of the north then, of bread there, so different and so like, of rounds baked beneath iron lids, and of bannocks hard as a man's heel, of the way butter melted on them in slow golden tears. He thought of the way snow muffles sound. The day would not give him such kindnesses. He lifted his chin and bore its heat. Word from Dragonstone came as a wedge of text sharp enough to cut. Stannis would come. Stannis named Joffrey, Tommen, and Myrcella Baseborn, and insisted that the hand of the law was already raised to strip them of what they had never owned. He did not say whether he would come with 10 men or 10,000. He did not speak Robert's name. He wrote as if what he said were stone, and the world must conform. Ned read the letter twice. He imagined placing it into the hand of a city and asking the city to love it. He imagined placing it into the hand of Renly and asking him not to strike back with his own document, written in the cursive of steel. He imagined setting it before Barristan Selmy who would bow his head to the words because the man valued order more than any name written above it. "We will need bread," he said aloud to no one in particular. "A great deal of bread." He looked to Littlefinger, who had arrived again as if his rooms were connected to Ned's by an invisible corridor, only he could walk. "Can you bring me grain from the Reach? Tonight if not sooner." Littlefinger smiled like a knife folded shut. "Fortunately, my Lord Hand, you have formed a friendship with a man whose brother is beloved at Highgarden. Coin finds its way more easily where family opens the door. The roads are not kind, but boats are loyal to money. I will send for it. Will you thank me? It will make the wine sweeter." He leaned a little. "You must also decide whose heads to strike. It is a terrible game, but it is a game. Too few and you are mocked. Too many and you are feared. There is a number, and it is not written in any book." "I will strike as few as I can," Ned said. Ned said. He meant it. He did not know if the city would let him keep it true. He thought of Sir Gregor Clegane burning the Riverlands by Tywin's whispered leave, and of the last letter he had from Caitlyn telling him of a boy named Hot Pie and a yellow-haired baker's apprentice, and whether such boys could live in a city that belonged to one banner or another. He wanted a world in which such boys could eat, breathe, and grow unpleasantly. He set his jaw and began to do the work that would make that world as likely as a man could devise in such a place. That day passed like the last, with the same world, the same men, their faces more drawn, their words more pointed. It seemed to Ned that he and Renly had seized a thing that felt very much like a hawk on the fist, beautiful, violent, in need of never-relenting attention, liable to rend you if you looked away. In the evening, after he had set the next spate of orders, he went to the godswood that was not, a scorched face in stone beneath a sky that looked bruised. He stood there a long time, his cane forgotten, and his leg a constant bell. He spoke aloud names that were not true prayers, but were the closest he could come in this city. He named his father and his brother, and the girl he had not married, and the woman he had, and each name steadied him a little. He named the boys in his house, and the girls beyond this wall. He named Robert, and when he did, he felt a weight lift that he had not known he carried. He said, into the hot, sour air, "I will not lie for you again," and the air did not answer. Syrio Forel trained Arya in a room 3 corridors away. Ned, passing, paused without entering and watched from the doorway as the man in gray danced across boards with a wooden sword that was a miracle of utility and grace. Arya's face was set with a concentration that would not sit long on Sansa's, but belonged to this child, as proper as a name. "Again," Syrio said, and Arya's wooden blade sprang as if it had decided to be something else. "Again," he said, and she laughed with frustration that was also joy. To Ned's surprise, he smiled in return. Renly found him there and stood beside him, unexpectedly quiet. "I envied you that when I was a boy," he said at last, in a voice that suggested he had surprised himself with the admission. "A father who looked at you like that. Our father looked at us and saw a tally. Our mother looked at us and saw a tapestry. Neither saw a boy. Men himself. Boys become men," Ned said. "And sometimes men become boys again, if they are unlucky." Renly laughed, and the sound went up and hit the beams and came back altered. "We will be many things before the year turns," he said. "You and I, and the city, and the realm. Best to choose a few, and do them well." Then now I. Ned thought perhaps he could do that. He could be a father who did not break. He could be a man who did not rush, who set stones where they could bear weight. He could be a hand who did not steal to feed his men, but would beg to feed their children if he had to. He could hold this hawk until the right man came to take it, or until it learned to ride a new fist. He could do that one day at a time, and if the day did not yield, he could take a knife to it and pry it open. And so the world arranged itself around the decision he had made in a hot room with a single candle as the night lingered. And every consequence of that decision began its long, meticulous descent down the scaffolds of men's lives. The Queen wrote letters that would be written with the speed of fear. Tywin Lannister put his finger upon a map and traced lines that soldiers would walk with iron sandals. Stannis Baratheon stared at a sea that would carry him and imagined it obedient. In Highgarden, A man with more belly than wit pretended not to understand the thing that his mother, his son, and his steward had already agreed and planned. In Winterfell, a raven landed, and a boy in a black branch took the scroll with hands that shook more from anger than cold. In the court's underplaces, a baker's girl told a tale to a man whose laugh couldn't be heard above his powder, and above them, under banners, a soldier counted how many days his pay would stretch and decided he could spare an onion. And in the heart of the keep, under stone that had seen 100 kings and would see fewer than it thought, Eddard Stark cleaned his seal with a cloth and set it down and rubbed at the mark the cane made in his palm and stood up, because there was another door to walk through and another man to tell a thing to that the man would not want to hear, and because he had not learned any other way to live. Hey. The door he chose led him to the second court, where the heat wavered already over flagstones, and the shadow of the Tower of the Hand stretched long and thin, like a blade laid aside. Men were posted where yesterday there had been none. 4 at the archway to the kitchens, 6 at the steps of the rookery, 8 at the curtain where the corridor bent toward the Queen's apartments. The placements had the careful untidiness of a field well plowed. They looked haphazard if you did not know what you were looking at. Ned paused at each, speaking a word or two, letting men see his face and the seal at his belt, making the day real with the small courtesies that bind obedience more surely than orders. A boy in gray livery came and bent, panting, to his side. "Lord Hand," he managed. "Sir Sandor Clegane requests audience. He says at once, but I don't think he means at once, because he is waiting by the old well and not by the door, and he would have pushed past us if he meant at once." "Tell him I will come to the old well," Ned said, and watch the boy flash away with the speed children. "Keep until their first bad fall teaches caution." The old well sat square and stolid in the yard, as it had sat for kings dead 6 generations and more. A circle of stone worn by the ropes, chafe into grooves a finger could snug into. The Hound leaned upon it as if it had been put there to hold him up. His long, hard face half in shadow, the burned corrugation of it catching the light like rock. He did not attempt courtesy. He did not bow. "You keep me for my prince," he said without preamble. His voice had the scrape of a whetstone. "You put your dogs at my kennel door and tell me I may not pass." "I keep you from a boy," Ned said. "He is not a prince today. He is Cersei Lannister's son. I am sworn to keep the peace until the succession is settled, and the peace requires that your sword not be where his temper is." Sandor's mouth twitched. It might have been a smile if the face had known how. "You think you're keeping me from him," he said softly. "You are keeping him from me. There's a difference. The boy would be glad to have me near. He is a creature that loves the mirror of his own cruelty. I am not his mirror. I am a thing that does not break under his fist, and that confuses him." He shifted his weight. The chain shirt he wore made a sound like coins poured slowly. "You have placed men at Tommen's door, and at the girl's. Good. Keep the girl behind 2 doors, and keep the boy behind 3. There are too many hands in this keep that would like to use a child like a knife." "Yours?" Ned asked, because it was a question that wanted asking in any city where men like Sandor Clegane breathed. Sandor's eyes flicked to him, lazy as a cat's, and no less predatory. "Not for the Queen," he said. "Not for your Stannis either. I am the Hound. I bite who I am told, unless I have reason not to. Give me a better reason than I have had. Do that, and I will suffer your men at my back. Don't, and I will go and take the boy by his collar and drag him to a window, and let him see what a city looks like when it burns." Ned felt the old anger stir, the kind his father had had much of, and had kept bridled by the training of a lifetime. "No city burns here while I am Hand," he said. "You are a sworn man of the King's Guard." Sandor's laugh was a dry cough. "Sworn to the King," he said. "Name me one." His gaze slid past Ned's shoulder to where Barristan Selmy came with steps that made sound only because the stones insisted upon it. The old knight did not hurry, and he had not hurried in decades. Men came to him, or the thing broke around him in such a way that he arrived at its center without haste. "Sir Sandor," Barristan said, and his voice set the words in order, each in its place. By the king's command, the hand holds the castle. By the king's letter, the hand commands the guard. You will do as he says. Then no. The hound watched him as a dog watches a stag. Then he reached up and traced, with 2 fingers, the line where skin and scar met on his cheek. I have done worse, he said, almost idly. For men I respected less. He pushed off the well and stood straight, and for a moment the yard seemed to remember something that men longed to forget, that there were some lives whose shape was forged upon an anvil no one else could see. I will keep my distance, he said. But hear me, Stark. If the queen sends for the boy with any of the white cloaks but him. He tilted his head toward Barristan. I will come whether you like it or not. You will have my leave before you have need of it, Barristan said. And if she sends a priest? Sandor asked, wicked dry. Then I will go in his place, Barristan said. And that ended it, because there are some answers that cannot be improved upon. Sandor grunted something that might have been assent and walked away, shoulders rolling like a fighter's. When he had gone, Barristan stood a moment, looking at the circle the sun had made on the well's lip. There are worse men in this keep, he said almost to himself. There are, Ned agreed. And fewer honest ones. He glanced to the window where he knew 2 girls waited, one with patience that came from a world of songs, one with impatience that came from a world of blows. Keep him watched. Use him if you must. But keep him in sight. I will, Barristan said, and moved away as quiet as he had come. The day put on a cloak of mourning with no less heat beneath it. Scribes with hands that shook more from fear of errors than grief inked Robert's name in black upon vellum, and then drew a line beneath it where dates and honors said a life had been the length of a king's reign. Silent sisters wrapped the broken body in linen and sweet herbs, and sawed away, with a neatness learned in a bloody school, the shaft of boar's tusk that had lodged near the spine. The high septon was fetched from his breakfast, and made to put aside his second honeyed bun to murmur the proper words. Pycelle had to be reminded twice that he was to stand, not sit, during the proclamation. When at last the bier came through the yard with 6 men under it, and a 7th at the head, ringing a small bell, the keep made the appropriate sound. A long, soft sigh like rain across old stone. Cersei watched from the inner balcony, still as marble except for her eyes, which moved and moved, counting men, counting pikes, counting every place where iron could be placed to block or broke. Joffrey was held back in the shadows by Trant's patient arm. His face made a mask of sorrow that fooled no one but himself. Tommen was not there. Good, Ned thought. Keep him away from the moment death teaches children that they are not the only thing in the world. Afterward, men spoke of banners and oaths in hushed voices that seemed indecent even so. Renly wore black, as if he had invented mourning for himself, and made it become him. Grief turned his youth to something that read as gravity. Loras Tyrell was almost careless in his plainness, hair bound in a strip of dark cloth like a vow taken for the length of a week. Ned saw Littlefinger twice on the edge of the crowd, and once glancing up at the queen with that mild curiosity. A man gives a stray cat a calculation how best to feed it so it will not scratch, or scratch where you intend. Messages moved. From Rosby came word that a certain Castellan had been offered a purse for the keeping of a certain boy. Varys brought it into the council chamber wrapped in jest, and placed it like a dagger on the table. A generous purse, he murmured. Too heavy for a child's belt, too light for a siege, exact for the purchase of a conscience. Whose? Renly asked, though there was something in his tone that suggested he did not much care, so long as the thing could be turned to soothe his temper. A man named Stokeworth, Varys said. Or perhaps Craighall, or perhaps Rosby. All those names begin to taste alike when they pass too often through my mouth. Forgive me. He fluttered fat hands, and his rings made little halos of gold. Send men, Ned said. Quiet men. Take the roads that do not look like roads. If the boy moves, close your hand. Gently, Varys said, very soft. Gently. The realm will not forgive us a bruise upon that pale arm. His eyes slid, a glance that took in Renly's antlers and returned with nothing in it to betray an opinion. The council cut and measured the day until afternoon brought with it a courier from the river with his horse's sides caked in a filth that had more blood than mud in it. Lords ride from the west with fire. the man said. His throat rasped. Ser Gregor went through Scherer. He cut a woman's head to see if the baby would roll out, and it did not because she was not far enough. He laughed. He seemed surprised to find himself speaking the words aloud. They turned a miller's boy on a spit at dairy. They took the grain. They burned the rest. Renly's jaw set. Loras's fingers had begun to drum upon the table's edge. He stilled them deliberately. Ned drank water and felt it settle in him like a stone that was also a seed. "We will answer," he said. "In law. In force if we must. The small folk bleed for the quarrels of great houses. We will end it where we can. Put out a call for the bannermen sworn to the crown's peace within 50 leagues. Barristan, draw up a writ for the arrest of Ser Gregor Clegane. He is to be seized and brought to face judgment. If he resists, he is to be slain as an outlaw. And send riders with orders to Sir Raymond Darry, Sir Carol Vance, Lord Piper. Hold your lands as you can. Do not burn your own crops. Do not give that man the feast he desires. I will write to River Run. Menetrator. River Run has had no letters from the hand of the king for some time," Littlefinger observed mildly. "It will be glad to receive one that is not a request for tax. River Run has had a daughter of Winterfell within its halls for 20 years, Ned said. And Littlefinger's smile grew a notch more sly, which was his way of hiding that the arrow had nicked him. "It will read my letter as a father reads a letter placed into his hands by his child." He wrote until the room swam in ink smell. To Hoster Tully he wrote as to a man who had once been young and full of words, and now sat weighted beneath his own flesh, and the acid inside it. A father who would know what it meant for a man to be trying to hold a city from breaking while his girls sat behind a door. To River Run's men he wrote as to the iron that had once made the Riverlands a place bandits feared to die in. To Winterfell he wrote as to a son who would read lines too heavy for him and pick them up anyway. To Caitlyn he wrote last, because the writing hurt, and because he could not give himself the indulgence of letting it make him weak for the rest. He told her of hot rooms and hotter tempers, of a queen that smiled like a knife, of a boy who snarled and a boy who hid, of a city hungry for bread and certainty. He did not write, "I should have listened to you when you told me to bring our daughters home the moment we arrived." He did not write, "I am afraid." He wrote, "We will come north. Wait for us where wisdom tells you, and love does not bid you otherwise." Caitlyn read those words under a high white ceiling, in a castle that hung in the sky like a thing a god might place upon a table for his amusement. The eyrie smelled of cold and milk. Lysa held the letter with fingertips, and then set it down, and did not pick it up again. Her lips made a small mow, as if the words had tasted sour in passing through the room. "You see," Lysa said to the heir, to the servants, to the girl hiding behind her mother's skirts, to the child beside her that she loved as if he were an infant and a sovereign at once. "You see what the lions do. You see what your husband has done to provoke them. You see the teeth." She did not see the thing the letter had not written. The thing that lay underneath its lines like a stick underneath silk. The way Caitlyn's heart ached to be in two places at once and could not be. The way she measured aloft the distances men walked on the ground. "Lady Lysa," Caitlyn said. Careful, patient, the way she had learned to speak to her sister since they were girls in River Run, and Lysa had been frightened of thunderstorms. "My lord husband holds the city in the king's name. He has kept the queen from doing what she would do. He has kept our girls behind doors with men he trusts outside them. He asks for help. He asks for news of the Riverlands. He asks where you stand." "Ben shall." "Safe," Lysa said. Her mouth tightened. "I stand safe. The Eyrie is safe. John would not have wanted me to put Sweet Robin in the way of men's quarrels. John is dead because of men's quarrels. I am not a man. Why should I quarrel?" She bent to the boy, who had been told 3 times already this morning that the hand had written to his aunt from the city where he had been born, and to which he would never return. "Sweetling," she crooned, "you are a little falcon. Falcons do not stoop for mice. Let the mice quarrel with the cats and be eaten." "The Riverlands are not mice," Caitlyn said evenly. "They are our father's people." "Our father has you," Lysa said, with a glance that was both fondness and accusation. He had me when he needed me. I am done being what men need." She turned the letter with a single finger, as if it might grow teeth and bite. "Let Stannis come and take the city if he can. Let Lord Tywin come and take it if he can. The Eyrie will still be here. I will still be here. You will be here too, if you have any sense." "Ben?" Caitlyn looked at the white light and the white stone and felt them press upon her like a sour milk that had curdled against the tongue. "No," she said gently. "I will go to River Run. My father is old. He is ill. He needs a daughter who will not tell him that the world can be kept at arm's length by shutting a door. If I can help my son from there, I will. If I cannot, I will still have done what a daughter must." She looked at the boy who clung like a crab to his mother's skirts. "Goodbye, Robert," she said soft. He pouted, then giggled, then demanded a sugared almond. Lysa gave him one at once. It broke between his teeth, and the crack sounded loud in the cold room. Robb Stark read his father's letter in Winterfell's solar with Maester Luwin at his elbow, and Theon by the hearth with a grin that was not unkind and not uncruel either. The air there was honest, and every stone underfoot had been set by a hand that wanted it there for a reason beyond making prettiness for a court. Robb's hair needed cutting. His jaw wanted a beard that would not grow yet and that affronted him for its refusal. His eyes, when he lifted them from the parchment, were gray as the pools in the godswood when ice begins to form on their edges. "He wants us ready," he said. "But he says we are not to move unless we must. He says the Riverlands are under attack, and that we may be called. He says the Queen is contained. He says," he swallowed, "he says Sansa and Arya are in his keeping, and will be sent north at the first moment it is possible." Theon shifted and stretched, long legs taking more of the rug than courtesy suggested. "If the Riverlands bleed, the wolves must show their teeth," he drawled. "The Lannisters will not stop with Darry and Sharer. They will smell blood and come to see how deep it runs." "Do not bait him," Luwin said without looking at him, to Theon, who smirked at having succeeded in baiting the maester instead. To Robb he said, "There is a difference between readiness and haste. Your Lord Father asks for the first and warns against the second. The North had no quarrel with the West yesterday. It has none today. If war must be, it will be because the Riverlands are the Tullys, and you are your mother's son as much as your father's." "And thou?" The great John Umber thumped in with the wind, a presence that filled the room and made the candles seem small. "Ravens talk too much," he boomed. "Men talk too little with their swords. If the lions gnaw at the river's banks, you send wolves to bite their arses, and they'll learn quick enough that water runs where it wants. Call your banners, boy dot. Let the bards write songs about how slow you were to do it when you're 50. He grinned, and the room felt smaller again. Robb met that grin with something unsteady and proud at once. "I will send riders," he said. Quietly. "The men will be told to gather at Moat Cailin. They are to provision for a long march through the neck. They are not to burn before they reach the Twins. We do not make enemies we do not need. And now," the great John's grin widened, for he liked a boy who spoke like a man, even if the man's voice cracked a little in the speaking. "Good," he said. "And when your father sends for us, we will come through the neck like a spear through rotten meat." He clapped Robb on the shoulder hard enough to make the boy's teeth click. "I'll have the Umbers ready in 10 days. The moose are fat." When he was gone, the room breathed out. Robb stood very still with his father's words in his hand until they felt like something that could be put down and not vanish. "I'll go to the Godswood," he said, "because when the day becomes too large, a boy goes to the place where trees have stood very long and learned things about keeping." Luwin nodded. Theon made a show of yawning and said he would go teach the hounds bad habits. Robb went alone and sat beneath the heart tree and told the white bark and the red leaves the names of his sisters. And in the silence that followed, he felt for the first time the thing Ned had felt since he came to the city. The sense that the world had shifted underfoot and that from now on the ground would never again feel entirely as it had the day before. In Dragonstone's deep rooms, the sea spoke in a guttural whisper that found its way into men's sleep and pried at their dreams. The castle was old, and it remembered hot things under its stones. The very walls seemed to hold a breath they did not release easily. Stannis Baratheon stood with his hands behind his back and stared at a table shaped like a continent. The painted rivers had started to flake in places. The green of the reach had faded from leaf to olive. The Dorne yellow kept its pride. Under the heel of his hand, the painted mountains of the Vale made a roughness he barely noticed. Davos Seaworth came in on souls that did not scuff and bowed, because a man bows to the sea and to Stannis for much the same reason. They will drown you if you do not respect them. Letters have come, Davos said. From the city. From the Hand. From the small council stamped with the old king's seal. From men who call themselves for the realm. From men who name themselves for the queen. Then Stannis did not reach for them. He waited, and Davos laid them out as he had learned the Lord liked. In order by signet in descending weight. Which one is from the Hand? Stannis asked at last. Davos touched the parchment with the direwolf on its strip. He holds the city, he said. He writes that he will hold it for the law. He does not name you king. He does not name the boy king. He says he will bar the queen from mischief. He says he will convene a thing like a council of great lords, if you will not come with your banners and seat yourself. A great council, Stannis said, and turned the words with clean distaste. A tool of weak kings and weaker lords. Law is not brought to vote. He took the parchment then, and read it with the steady concentration of a man who did not let ink's quirks distract him from what letters said. He speaks true about the queen, he said, when he had finished, and he lies by omission about me. He is an honest liar. I will prefer that to the other sort. Menderuasi. Melisandre stood near the window slit, where red light sometimes found her and made her seem, to men who already feared her, half of fire and half of woman. He fears the fire you bring, she said. And her voice had that burning silk in it, that made Davos want to pour water on a thing he could not see. He fears Orlor's light, because it will make visible what he has tolerated in shadow. He holds a sword not meant for him. Let him feel it heat in his hand until he drops it. Cresson, older than the wind, stood at the other end of the table with a hand braced against the painted north as if it could lend him strength. He is Eddard Stark, the maester said. He is what he says on the parchment. If he holds the city against the queen, that weakens your enemies more than his refusal to call you king weakens you. Refusal to call me king weakens law, Stannis said, in the same tone he would have used to correct a child at his letters. The boy is not Robert's get. Stark names it without naming it, because he clings to something like courtesy, even when it is a hindrance. I do not. Davos, you will take ship before the sun has the whole sky. You will go up the Blackwater under night with 3 boats and 20 men and your wits. You will seek out the Hand. You will tell him that the law has no room for councils. You will tell him that if he opens the gates, I will ride in and hang no man who has done his duty. You will tell him that if he bars them and hides behind some pretense of other men's voices, I will set boats across the river and starve the city and not count the children who cry. Tell him this, and tell him it is not bluster. He knows that already, I think. A muscle in Stannis' jaw jumped and stilled and jumped again. Tell him I remember the trident. Tell him I remember when Robert bled and laughed at the same time, and that I did not laugh. Tell him I do not laugh now. Davos bowed his head. He had been a smuggler too long not to taste the depths around words, the currents where they drag men. My lord, he said, I will tell him. Might I also tell him that the ships of the Reach will arrive if he can keep the city fed and quiet for 3 weeks? He has made friends in odd places, that one. Stannis' mouth tightened, satisfaction and annoyance quarreling and reaching a truce by both being denied the field. Tell him what you like, he said. Bring me back the city if words will buy it. If not, we will buy it with other coin. He turned his head. Lady. Melisandre's eyes were far off, as if she were watching flames where there were none men could see. The night is dark and full of terrors, he said, and smiled in a way that Davos had learned to loathe. But light grows where a man stands without flinching. The cold gods of the north will not help him. The false gods of the Seven will not help him. He is a man of duty. Duty is a poor god but a good lamp. Matter. Crescent lifted his chin with the last of his strength. "And what god are you?" he asked her softly. She turned her head to him, and for a moment there was no heat at all in her face. There was only the keen curiosity of a scholar who has found a new insect and wants to see how it moves. "I am a woman," she said. "I bring a god with me, and he is older than your chains and your little birds. You will not like him. Men do not like fire until they are cold." Davos returned to the sea because a man always returns to the sea in the end. He took with him men he trusted to be quiet, and to row without speaking, and to stab without hesitation if the water began to tell tales. The tide carried them up the Blackwater with deceitful gentleness. The city rose before them like a promise that might be a threat, its walls set upon their baked earth, its towers pricking the darkening sky. He had been a smuggler long enough to know the back doors of a place, and he took one now, sliding into a black cut where the water smelled of old fish and spilled wine and a fragrance he could not name that was not wholly unpleasant. At an agreed place that was a heap of broken stone, a man waited with a lantern hooded to a slit. He clicked it twice. Davos clicked back. Men are often a more reliable signal than stars. Ned met him in a narrow room that had been long ago a cellar for a tavern that had burned in some king's reign no one remembered. There were 3 men with him. Jory's cousin Alan, in a cloak that had seen better sewing, a Tyrell spearman, whose accent turned hard edges soft, and Barristan Selmy. That last gave Davos pause. The old knight's presence told him that words would be taken as binding, and not as theatrical wind. "Davos Seaworth," Ned said, and there was a message in the way the hand had chosen to name him. Not Onion Knight, not Lord of anything. Davos felt no offense. He had no need of titles in rooms like this. "You come to speak for Stannis." "I come to speak for the law," Davos said, and saw Ned's mouth shift at the familiar line. "My lord sent me. He says you hold the city for the law. He says the law names him king. He says open the gates, and he will bring order that will not harm your men. He says if you do not open, he will starve you. He does not say he will enjoy it." "Man?" "I would not believe him if he did," Ned said. He was heavy-eyed with the kind of tired that comes from holding too many strings and trying not to let them tangle. "Tell your lord I have set the city into a peace so brittle I can hear it creak. Tell him I will not open the gates to a quarrel of Baratheons when the Lannisters' claws are sunk into the riverlands and drawing blood. I will hold the keep for him until we can seat the succession without knives. I will convene a great council, yes. Let the lords of the realm look at his letter, and look at the boy's hair, and look at what law says when it is not fed on flattery. If they will not give him his due then, his due will not be worth much when he takes it by force. And law is not a feast where lords choose their wishes," Davos said. But he did not say it with anger. He said it with the reluctance of a man repeating a thing that had once been gospel in his mind and had begun of late to show a hairline crack at one corner. "My lord will not like the word counsel." Ned looked at Barristan. "What will the Kingsguard do if the elder Baratheon comes before the city with banners and drums?" he asked. He did not call Stannis king, and Davos noticed and admired the neatness. "We will keep the queen confined and the children in safety," Barristan said. "We will hold the Red Keep for the hand because the letter says so, and because the letter is the king's letter. If Lord Stannis enters in peace, we will stand on either side of him. If he tears the city like cloth..." The old man's mouth thinned. "I have held 1,000 oaths in my life. They do not tell you what to do when they pull your limbs in opposite directions. Now, you might try letting one go," Davos said, surprising himself. He had meant to bring threats and left with this. If a man has 2 ropes on him and the tide is strong, he drowns. Barristan's stare softened by a hair. And if he lets go the wrong one, he cuts the ship adrift," he said. "Do not teach me to drown, Onion Knight. I have been in deep water before." Davos looked back to Ned. "If you will not open your gates, feed your city," he said. "You will not need to starve them to break your peace. Hunger will do it for you. Stannis will bring grain only after he sits the throne." "Men of Shawan, I'm already thieving in the Reach," Ned said, and the corner of his mouth gave a twitch that was the ghost of a smile he had not encouraged since coming to the city. I have bribed 1,000 men who do not fear gods and bullied 10 who do. I will have cranes at the quays and carts at the warehouses before the new moon. Bread is law. Dai. Davos inclined his head. Tell the men on the walls, he said. If they fire at our boats when we come to count, men will drown. Do not make them drown for pride. Pride is a poor drowning. I will tell them, Ned said. And he meant it, and Davos knew it. They stood a moment and looked at each other as men sometimes do when they have discovered, to their surprise, that there is a likeness between them that neither expected and both would prefer not to acknowledge. Then Davos slid back into his element and became again what the sea had made of him. He told Stannis everything he had heard, and the man listened without interruption, and then sifted the words as if they were sand in which he expected to find a needle. He will not open, he said at last. He will call the lords. He will make a play for propriety. He will feed the city, Davos said. If he can. Then we will count out our grain like coins and watch his piles shrink, Stannis said. The Lannisters are demons only in men's mouths. They bleed like anyone. The Riverlands will not hold them if the Riverlands fight alone. They will take River Run. That will send a wolf south. That will bring 2 wolves together. Then the lords at the council will pretend it wasn't fear that made them choose me. He rubbed at his jaw. We will not unship the siege engines yet. We will make the city fear our ships without tasting them. Let Renly see them and taste jealousy, if nothing else. Renly watched those ships from the crenels with a face as smooth as water on a still day. Loras stood beside him, restless as a stallion in spring. He makes you wait, Loras said. He will take your city if you let him hold the gates in your name. It is not my city, Renly said. It is a toy I borrow from a crabbed elder brother and return to him only when he comes and takes it from my hands. That is the part that piques. He had left off his antler pin this morning. A plain strip of green cloth held his cloak. The absence made him look more himself and less the thing he presented at court. He will come. He will bring a god with him and a lawyer's tongue. He will make men hate him because he makes them feel small. Then he will need me more than now. He glanced sideways. Do you think I cannot count? Highgarden will fill its halls with my banners if I but ask. The Stormlords will come, if I but wink. But if I leave now, Stark will call me traitor to the very law he holds up like a banner in both hands. He will live a week without me, and the city will have a taste of the thing it is like to be ruled by parchment. Then I come back with trumpets. Even a maester could see the shape of it. Then no. Loras's smile was sudden and boyish, the smile that had charmed half the capital and made the other half want to throw him in a fountain. Then go, he said. But not in daylight and not with farewell kisses. The city will pull at your cloak and hold you at the knee. If you mean to make music of your return, you must leave without clattering your strings on your way out. Renly looked out at the water very long. At last he nodded. We go tonight, he said. You and 50. Leave the other men where they are, so Stark can pretend nothing has changed while everything has. I will leave him Slint to wrangle, and I will leave him my thanks, and I will leave him a promise of grain. I will leave him the Hound and the old knight and a eunuch made of smoke. I will take the part of the city that smiles when the sun touches it and ride with it to where the sun is used to shining. Then, when he came to Ned, he did not bring a flourish. I go, he said. I will not name it fleeing because I do not flee. I will call it a ride I must take to fetch a thing the realm requires. I will bring back 6,000 swords and songs to keep them marching. Keep the city from breaking. If Stannis comes in like a judge and sets his scales upon the table, let him do it in a hall I built for him, not in one he thinks he found himself. You were the wind that filled my sails, Ned said. You will tear canvas when you go. He did not plead. He merely named the shape of what would be. Leave me a harbor master I can trust and a captain of the watch that will not change colors at noon. Janos Slint will chase a coin tossed from any balcony, Renly said cheerfully. I will toss 2 from yours for every one the queen would throw from hers. He will count. It is a language he speaks. As for the harbor master, take a Tyrell. They count better than Slint, and pretend not to. Sir Garland knows grain. You'll like him better than me. He will like you better than he likes me. He likes things that have weight. Dando. Ned did not answer the jest. He watched the young man's face and saw there the boy who had run behind Robert at Storm's End with a wooden sword, and the man who had learned how to make men love him by making himself into something they wanted to be near. Go quietly, he said. Leave me fewer cheers to silence. Renly smiled, quick and rueful and alive. I will leave you one, he said, and took Ned's hand. A warm, firm grasp, over before a man could consider what it meant, and then he was gone down a passage where the stone-remembered feet that had run once to a woman with hair like summer wheat and laughter like a field. By dawn, Renly was a rumor. By noon, he was a story. By dusk, he was a song. The city learned swiftly how to convert loss into song. It was the only alchemy it had perfected. Ned counted what was left. Men whose oaths had been to Renly personally and, in his absence, had faded into water. Men whose oaths had been to the office and thus remained. The Hound, Barristan, Littlefinger and Varys like two ends of a rope that might be used to pull a boat ashore or to strangle a man, depending on who held them. In the Queen's chambers, Cersei took her meals in stony silence and stared not at walls, but at doors, as if to teach them shame for not opening. Sansa came to him once in the afternoon, escorted by Septa Mordain and a guard who wore the look of a man who has been asked to carry a glass roof down a crowded street. She curtsied perfectly and lifted her chin. Father, she said soft, I am sorry for being cross yesterday. Septa says I must make amends. I have thought of a way to make amends. If I write to Robb and tell him that everything is well, and that he does not need to come south with men and hurt people, that will be a help, will it not? Then, do you think he will come south with men? Ned asked, because he would have the shape of her thought, even if it was made of clouds. I think the Riverlands are where mother's kin are, Sansa said, carefully repeating things her Septa said, and sometimes confusing them with her own. I think if they are hurt, Robb will be hurt. I think if he is hurt, he will come. If he is not hurt, he will not come. If I tell him I am not hurt, he will not come. Da. He took her hands and held them lightly, so that she felt both the warmth and the lack of force. You may write to your brother, he said. You may tell him you are safe and that you love him. You may not tell him anything that sounds like it was said near a Lannister. You must use your own words. My own words, she echoed, not quite understanding what trick he had set her, and yet glad to have a task with the flavor of peacemaking. I will make my letters very neat. Arya's letter, when she demanded to write one because Sansa was allowed, consisted of one line. Don't be stupid, when Luwin would have smoothed it and Septa would have scolded. Ned smiled and sealed it without comment. He will know who writes, he said. That night Varys came with the soft insistence of steam and placed upon Ned's table a pouch that smelled faintly of almonds. This is the gold that was to be given to a certain Castellan to help a certain boy take the air outside the city, he said. It is better where it is. Where should it be? Ned asked. In a baker's shop, Varys said. You asked for bread. This is bread when it is needed. The city needs kneading, my lord. It is a lump. Left alone, it will be hard as stone and useless to eat. Handle it with gentleness and heat, and it will feed men. He opened his palms and let the possibilities rise between them like steam. Will it make them love me? Ned asked dryly. He was too tired to pretend he did not know the answer. Love? Varys tittered. No, I. But it will make them find you less offensive to their bellies than your enemies. That is all love ever is in a city. Dannen? At the south gate 2 nights later, a heavy carriage rattled at a walk, its curtains drawn, its horses blown as if they had been pushed to speed, and then checked by caution. The captain of the watch lifted a hand. No one passes without writ, he said. A woman's voice slid from the curtain dark, low and honeyed. The Lady Taena of Myr sends greeting, it said. Her mother is taken with a fever that burns like a priest's mouth. The lady's presence is required at once or a good woman will die, and her kin will curse a city for a century. The city is already cursed, the captain said. Draw the curtain. No, the voice said. With that note, certain sorts of women keep like a dagger in their sleeve. The lady is not dressed for public gaze. Then she will ride home and put on her gown, the captain said cheerfully. He banged the butt of his spear upon the stones. Men came and took hold of the carriage. It jerked and squealed as if it were a living thing, indignant at being handled. The curtain jerked back. Within sat a woman very fair and very frightened and very much not the Lady Tina of Myr, who had a mole above her mouth and a lilt to her speech besides. This woman had broad cheeks and hair dyed a color that could not be persuaded to appear natural. At her knees, stuffed into the space as if he had been goods, Tommen Baratheon tried very hard not to cry. The Hound stepped out of shadow with a sound like iron. "Come, pup," he said in a voice that had seen boys cry and had not been moved. "We're going home." He lifted the child as if Tommen weighed nothing. The boy made a sound that was not a sob and not a protest either. And then his small arms went around the Hound's neck with a trust that had nothing to do with reason. The woman in the carriage began to tell a story of being coerced by men in crimson. She did not know the names of. The captain listened with courteous boredom and made note of the detail about the purse she had dropped in her panic. It would be useful later. When Ned heard, he closed his eyes and let a breath leave him that had been coiled in his chest since he had placed men at the queen's doors. "Send flowers to the queen from the hand," he told Varys. "To the eunuch's delight, white lilies. Write that I rejoice that the prince did not catch a chill." "Cruel," Varys breathed. "You have learned more of this city than you will confess, my lord." He had learned enough to fear it, and fear sharpened him more than pride. When word came from the west that Sir Edmure Tully had ridden to meet the lions and been thrown back with his banners torn like cloth, Ned sent his letters differently, with fewer flourishes, with more hard words. When word came that Tyrion Lannister had been seen in his father's camp with a sellsword in a piebald cloak and a mouth that poured wine and wit in equal measures, he remembered Caitlyn dragging the dwarf up the high road and wondered if this, too, was one of the stones they had placed at the beginning of this road. When word came that Hoster Tully had taken to his bed and would not rise, Ned felt for the first time the tug of the South on him as an almost physical thing. A hand at his belt, trying to pull him away from everything that looked like home. The Great Council proved to be an exercise in geometry, angles and arcs and weights, and in the end, the thing would fall where gravity wished. Men came by dozens, the ones who were nearest, and the ones who wished to be seen as being where the center was. The Vale sent no lord. Lysa had written a letter so cold it should have crackled when broken, and had affixed to it a seal pressed so deep that it had almost come through the vellum. The Westerland sent none because Tywin did not mistake the council for anything but a trap set by other men's words. The North sent none because it had not had time to cross the neck with more than birds. The Reach sent two. A Hightower with a smile like a folded fan and a red wine who smelled faintly of wine and had more sense than he allowed men to see. Stormlords came. They would always come to a place a Baratheon would be named, if only to make sure another Baratheon did not take the horn before they had a chance to drink. Pycelle droned the legalities in a voice that made men yawn behind their hands. Varys arranged chairs as if there were divinities that must sit together and mortals who must not. Littlefinger circulated like a subtle disease. Barristan stood in white behind Ned's chair and did not shift weight from one foot to the other, though his leg must have ached as badly as Ned's did. Cersei did not appear. She sent a message instead, as a queen will do when she means to show disdain. It was short, and the script was Lannister neat. The Lion does not attend the Jackal's banquet. Stannis names himself king by right of law, Ned said when it came time for words that were not droning. Robert's letter places the realm under the hand until the succession be settled. The boy Joffrey is not Robert's get. I have evidence of this, sworn by men who dare not bring their faces into this room. The queen is confined because law says she must be, and because prudence says she may not be trusted. The law names the king. You may choose to like or dislike that. The law does not alter for our likings. Memesand. The Hightower smiled and arranged his sleeves. The law, he murmured, has, on occasion, been brought to heel by necessity. Heron the Black found this to be true. Aegon the Conqueror had a dragon to teach men necessity. One of their dragons is in this room today, I think. The other is outside the walls, on ships. No. Necessity is a word for men who have already chosen and wish for a sweeter name, Ned said. The choice is simple. Name Stannis and save yourselves a war that will be uglier, because we pretend it is something else. Name the boy, and you will have his mother and her father within the year with men who will strip your vineyards and call that justice. Then, the red wine blew out his cheeks in a show of thought. Stannis will strip our vineyards too, he said cheerfully. But he will count the grapes he leaves. The queen will trample them and tell us to be grateful for wine. He looked sideways at the Hightower, who looked at his nails. It is a pity, he added almost kindly, that Stannis cannot smile. Kings do not need to smile, said a Stormlord with a jaw that looked carved. They need to make storms stop. Lord Stannis will stop storms. The boy will think storms are a thing to get him wet for fun. Even men who did not love Stannis nodded at that. They made noises about prudence, about oaths, about children, and harsh words. They asked after Tommen and Myrcella with careful voices. Ned answered each in turn with the same even weight that eventually wore some men down. The council did not end with a cheer, nor with a proclamation. It ended with a slowly gathering sense that a thing had been decided not because it was charming, but because it was heavy, and had rolled downhill to where gravity wished it to be. Men began to say aloud without looking around them, King Stannis, and to find that the words did not choke them. When word of it leaked, as all words leak in a city, Stannis sent back ships enough to be seen and not shot at, and a letter with no flourish, naming the day he would enter the city with 100 men, no more. He is not a fool, Varys murmured, turning the parchment with 2 fingers as if it might bite anyway. He means to walk into this court like a ledger writ large. He will walk, Ned said. And if he runs, it will be because the city tripped him. He rubbed at the ache in his leg and thought of the path from the gate to the throne room, of how easily a man could come to believe a crown was a thing that waited at the end of a certain number of paces. Men did not often see the places where the ground tilted. Cersei saw the tilt. She had seen it the first day she bled as a girl, and had never stopped looking for it since. The night before Stannis was to enter, she had wine with her brother's man Meryn, and made him drink too much of it. She sent 2 boys to the kitchens to fetch sugar and told them to run fast and knock over anyone who tried to stop them. She called for Pycelle and made him lecture on the 7 steps of succession, until even Pycelle was bored. While the court yawned, she sent Lancel to the harbor master with a bundle of papers that did not read the way they appeared to read and coin to make them seem more plausible. She sent a whisper to the men of the Alchemists' Guild, who had wanted for years to hear a woman of rank speak their art's name without disdain. The whisper reached Varys through a chain of ears he had polished over years, until they caught a breath, and held it. He came to Ned long after midnight, and poured in his ear a trickle of words that grew into a stream, and then a flood. Wagon, cask, guild, green. Ned sat up too fast and felt the room sway. No fire, he said. Not in this city. Not that fire. We will move the wagons, Varys said. We will move the guild. We will move the men. If we cannot move them, we will stop them with steel. But a woman who sees that she has lost a game will flip the board if she can. You must expect that, and lay your hands flat upon the problem, so it cannot buck you. Mendemindy. Barristan, Ned said, and the old knight was at his door as if the place beyond the door were where he had been planted for the night. He heard wildfire, and went whiter than his cloak. I have seen what it does, Barristan said, under his breath. A King's Landing once, when a mad king thought it a pretty color. It eats like a thing alive. It clings. We will have none of it, Ned said. Take your men. Take the Hound. Take Slint, and put him where he can see you. Break and spill anything that smells of it. Bring me the men who lit the candles that made this possible. He stood too fast again. Pain sang up his leg and made stars in the corners of his eyes. If she sets fire to this city to make a point, I will make points of every doorpost between here and Casterly Rock and hang her name upon them. The night became a blur of motion. Gold cloaks clattered. Tyrell men moved soft. White cloaks flashed in torchlight. The alchemists' guild protested with dignified horror, and then with undignified shrieks when a cask was rolled and its vapor licked at a torch and spat. The Hound kicked a door and was rewarded with a green kiss that curled his lip and made him laugh in a way that frightened the men who heard it. Slint swaggered and bellowed, and when no one was looking, flinched at shadows. By dawn, 3 wagons had been turned, a dozen casks split and drowned, 2 alchemists arrested, and 1 poor fool burnt to death because he had tried to save a ledger that told him how much men owed him. "Ah," Littlefinger said, appearing when there was credit to be taken. "The city will sing of the hand who saved it from burning in the belly." His eyes slid to Ned's leg. "Though you might benefit from letting a little heat near your bones, they creak." "Go count casks," Ned said, too tired for banter. "Bring me the names of everyone the guild has paid this month." "How like you to imagine that such a list exists," Littlefinger said, amused and pleased to be asked. "But I will bring you 3 lists, and one will be close to the truth." Stannis entered the city on the appointed morning with exactly 100 men and a face that betrayed nothing until you looked too long at it, and discovered there was a weariness there, as profound as any man carries who has done the thing he thought he must at the cost of the thing he knew he wanted. The crowds did not cheer. They did not hiss either. They watched, and their watching had weight. Bread had arrived at dawn in carts under the hands of men with Reach accents, and was being distributed in the market by men in Tyrell green, under the eyes of men in gold cloaks, who pretended they were there to keep order, and not to make sure the loaves went to the right mouths. The city did not love any man for long. It loved bread every day. In the throne room, under beams that remembered other men's crowns, Stannis stood with his hand upon the pommel of a sword he did not draw. Ned watched him and felt for an instant a ridiculous desire to laugh. It was like being in a small cold chapel after a night in a brothel. Nothing lied here. Everything was hard. The queen did not appear. The boy did not appear. Barristan took his place at Stannis' left by making no show of taking it, simply by moving a half step nearer than he had stood the day before. The Hound stood with the gold cloaks because he would not stand with white or green or black. Littlefinger stood near a pillar, hands folded like a man posing for a coin. "The law names me king," Stannis said. He wasted no time with courtesies. "The law names your boy baseborn, my lady queen, though you are not here to hear it. The law names the hand obedient to the king. The law has been met. I will take the throne." "Ben?" "You will take the throne," Ned said, and his voice did not break because he had given it practice this last week, saying the same hard things over and over until they wore grooves that were easier to slide into. "And you will hold the city and the realm, and the riverlands, and the north, and the vale, and the reach, and Dorne by more than law. You will hold them by bread. You will hold them by mercy. You will hold them by not burning men who disagree with you just because you can. You will hold them by making the men in this room regret, quietly, and to themselves, that they do not like you." "Ma'am?" Stannis' mouth gave a movement that might have been the beginning of a smile in some other man. "I will hold them by right," he said. "If bread and mercy help, I will hold them by those too." He mounted the steps. He did not sit. He turned. "Bring the queen." Cersei came as if she had not been told, in white, that made her look a saint if you did not look at her eyes. Joffrey came, sulking, pushed by Meryn Trant, who had the air of a man who had been given a frog to carry and told not to let it jump. Tommen burst into tears when he saw the room. Myrcella did not. "Lady Cersei," Stannis said, "you are confined. Your children will be kept in comforts suitable to their station. You will not leave the keep until I say. If you attempt to flee, I will chain you in a cell far beneath the castle, where even your father's gold will not find you. Say nothing. You have said too much." "And now ender." Cersei opened her mouth and then closed it again. She had not imagined, perhaps, that a man could speak to her thus in the heart of the keep, where she had laughed and wept, and made men do likewise. Her hands tightened in her skirts. She looked at Ned with a look that said 100 things. He would hear all of them later, he suspected, in the way arrows deliver messages to flesh. The king? That was Stannis now, and the word fell into its groove with an odd mix of relief and foreboding. Turned his head. Sir Barristan, he said. Take the boy and the girl to their rooms. Take 20 men you trust, and 20 men the hand trusts, and 20 men the gold cloaks fear. Put them on the doors. If anyone attempts to pass, kill them. If any man argues, kill him. If any woman pleads, do not listen. Nam? Barristan bowed, old and grave and tired, and in that moment, the most dangerous man in the room. He took the children like a duty. It went, that day, not with a splash, but with a settling. Men who had prepared speeches closed their mouths and saved them for later. Men who had prepared rebellions set them aside for a week. Men who had imagined that the world was going to reshape itself around their comfort discovered that it would keep its hard corners for a while yet. The city did not burn. The bread reached the markets again at noon. The sun went down on a city that still existed. That night Ned sat alone with a cup he did not drink, and the seal under his hand, and let his thoughts circle the thing he had helped bring to pass. Law had bowed its head to the hard shape of a man who would not bend. The queen had been shut away, and her father's horsemen would already be riding. And the riverlands bled still. Renly would be gathering smiles and swords in equal measure somewhere between Bitterbridge and Highgarden, and he would march them to a tune that made farmers fall in behind. The Vale would pretend not to see. The North would come for its own reasons. He saw the pieces moving, and could not see where they would stop. He kept in his mind only one thing he could hold to. 2 girls in a room. A door with men he trusted outside. A road that ran north through the neck and into air. A man could breathe without tasting other men's breath in it. Before dawn, Varys slid in like a thought. A man cannot keep from returning to. A raven came from River Run, he said. Hoster Tully has named his banners to ride to his son's call. He says a wolf runs better when the river runs with it. He spread his hands. It is a pretty image. It also means more men with swords will move. Everything means more men with swords will move, Ned said. Tell me when someone sends me men with plowshares. Never, Varys said sweetly. And if a man did, you would hang him for impudence. He cocked his head. You have held a mad city still for a week, and put a hard man in a chair carved for dragons. I will not praise you beyond your tolerance. But I will say this. The list of men who could have done it does not take many lines. I had help, Ned said, and he meant it. I will have enemies for it, and for that too I had help. He set his cup aside. What will she do? She will write to her father and tell him to ride like a storm and bring her children back out into the sun. He will ride. She will tell those who owe her to remember who filled their cups. They will remember. She will look at her reflection and see a girl younger than she is and tell herself she has time. She does not. Now. And Renly? Varys' mouth made an appreciative little mow. He will try to fit a crown around a smile. It will look well upon him. He will not consider whether it will hold when he frowns. Ned rubbed at the scar the cane had taught into his palm. I will send the girls north the first day I can, he said. If I do nothing else, I will do that. Do that, Varys murmured. And for once there was nothing sly in it. Send them, and you will have done a thing no one can take from you, even if they take your head. I would prefer to keep that too, Ned said, dry, and Varys laughed. A startled bird's sound. Outside the city woke again, and the heat came back, and men began to walk in the grooves the last days had made. The Red Keep adjusted itself to the weight of a new king, and the great sept prepared to hear oaths it had heard before, and would hear again. The Hound found a corner of a yard that had always been his and trained with sword and shield until his shirt clung to his back, and his breath came in hisses. Loras Tyrell, far away already, showed his horse a stretch of road, and promised it that they would make a better dress of banners next month. In the north, a boy moved a stone upon a board that had wolves and lions carved at its corners, and looked at his mother with a face that belonged to both his grandfathers. In the west, a lord with hair like pale iron lifted his hand, and set it down upon a map, and men moved where that hand had been. In Dragonstone, a priestess held her palms over coals that did not burn her, and saw a stag stamped in shadow upon a wall, and told herself that this was a sign she had been right all along. And Eddard Stark, who had chosen once in a hot room with a single candle, and had chosen again each hour since, closed his eyes for the length of 5 heartbeats, and saw Winterfell's godswood as clearly as if it had been drawn upon the inside of his lids. He saw a girl with tangles in her hair, and a stick in her hand, and a boy who had learned to speak to his hounds, and a woman who had been his home before he had known the word could be flesh. He opened his eyes and rose, and took up the seal again because there was another door, and another after that, and none of them would open without his hand. He did not have to like this truth. He only had to live inside it. Stannis' first days as king were an inventory, which suited him. He counted treasuries, which were emptier than exactness preferred. He counted swords, which were fewer than pride imagined. He counted ships, which were more than a landman might guess and less than the sea would require, if the sea were minded to be contrary. He sent letters written in a hand that did not know how to loop prettily. He asked for less gold than a spendthrift and more soldiers than a peacekeeper. He summoned the lords who could come without crossing lions. He ignored the ones who could not. When men brought him tales of villagers with bellies swollen from hunger, he made a face only inches softer than his usual face, and told Littlefinger to turn 1 coin into 3 by lending and borrowing in the same breath. Littlefinger did, with pleasure. When men brought him tales of Mance Rayder beyond the wall, he glanced, an irritated flicker. "We have no boats to sail upon snow," he said. "We will give the North its business when it ceases to be a myth used by men who have no other to take pride in." Ned did not like the line, but there was meat to carve nearer at hand. He took Barristan with him to the yard where Janos Slynt had gathered his captains, and was roasting them with a speech. "The city is not a child to be beaten into eating its porridge," Ned said when Slynt paused. "It is a child to be tricked into it with honey." "Honey costs," Slynt said, out of habit. "Men who carry honey lick their fingers." "I will count your fingers after," Ned said, and Slynt's little eyes gleamed with the sliver of respect he gave to men who threatened him correctly. The first assault upon the new order did not come with banners. It came with knives. 2 men in plain clothes tried a door they should not have, and when they were stopped by a pair of Tyrell spearmen, they smiled and drew blades that had been dipped in something that made the wounds they made weep, like a child who cannot stop. 1 spearman died quickly and 1 slowly. The slow dying taught Ned that the Queen had remembered an old apothecary of poisons and sent for him. Varys had the man named by noon and hanged by dusk, which offended Varys' own sense of theater and propriety, but pleased Ned's sense that some things require speed to make sense to the world. The city saw the rope. The city approved. It is a cheap approval, rope. After that, Cersei tried words, which were the weapons that had always served her best. She sent a note to Sansa in her fine curving hand. "Come to me, sweetling. Bring your sister. A mother's heart is never chained." Sansa brought it to Ned with cheeks that already warmed with blush for having been chosen for such tenderness. He read it with a straight face and tore it neatly down the center, and then down the center again. "When you are a mother," he said, "you will learn which chains hold and which do not. For now, stay away from doors that open into danger just because you like what is said through them." "But she is a queen," Sansa whispered, and it was not awe that made her say it. It was the child's sense that a queen is a story you step into, that it cannot harm you because it is a story. "And a wolf is a beast with teeth even when it lies in a storybook by a hearth," he said. "Do not hold your hand to its mouth to see if it will bite. It will." "Oh." Arya, who had listened without pretending otherwise from the window seat with her knees hugged to her chest, said, "I will bite it first." And Syrio said, "Just so," and made her do the step again that teaches a foot how to be where a sword is going to be. It could not last. No peace in King's Landing lasts. But it lasted longer than any man of good sense would have wagered, because each side was practicing at the other as if they were swordsmen in a training yard, learning feints, timing, the way the other man's shoulder moved before the blade followed. Letters went. Caravans moved with more guard than goods. The sept grew full, and then empty, and then full again, as men asked the gods to remember their faces, in a city where faces changed to match fortunes. The small folk learned where the breadlines were shortest. The brothels learned new names to assign to old desires. The watch learned that their captain would double a man's pay if he gave him a name that led to a purse or a cell. Then the river sent up a smell of smoke that was not merely the city's smoke. And on a certain afternoon, when the light fell golden and low, as if attempting to make the day look gentler than it had been, a boy in a leather jerkin with Derry's badge on his sleeve limped into the court with news that hurt to hear. River Run was busy. Edmure was taken in his own yard. The Lannister host sat a ring of fire and steel around stone men had called unassailable since before the Conqueror. Hoster Tully lay in his solar and listened to the sound of rams at his gate. It changed the air. It always does when a siege begins. Men who had thought their troubles were merely local discovered they had a taste of history's iron in their mouths. Ned felt, in a place he had learned not to let show on his face, a pull that had his name and Caitlyn's plated into it. The message from the north came 3 days later, in Robb's clear too-large hand. The banners are at Moat Cailin. The neck is slow, but it yields to us. Tell Sansa and Arya that we come to fetch them, one way or another. Tell Mother I obey her where I can, and disobey her where I must. I am sorry for the must. Stannis received this with the expression of a man who has been told the weather is doing a thing weather must do. He comes, he said. Good. I will have wolves to balance lions and roses to balance both. I will need all that to keep my chair from listing. Merci, Mar. Do not forget the chair sits upon a city, Ned said. Do not forget the city sits upon hunger. I will not forget hunger, Stannis said. It does not forget me. He looked at Ned, and for the first time since he had come into the hall under the Baratheon banners as king, some flicker of human sympathy moved in that stony face. I do not know why you stayed here to do the work you do, he said, almost awkward. There is no honor in it, and there is little glory, and it will give you nothing men can see. But if I sit here a year from now, and the city has not burnt, and the lords have not cut each other's throats upon my floor, it will be because you did what you are doing now. Ben Sal. I stayed because my daughter's rooms open on a corridor where my feet know every stone, Ned said simply. I stayed because no other man I trust stands in the place I stand. I stayed because when you put your hand to a wheel, you do not take it off because the road turns stony. He hesitated, then added, I stayed because Robert once laughed and bled in equal measure, and because he was my friend before he was my king, and because I would not let his ending be a thing only our enemies. Stannis' mouth tightened again, which was as close as he came to anything softer than granite. Very well, he said. Send your girls north the first day a man of honor can be found to escort them. Do it before I decide that keeping them here suits some arithmetic of mine, because I am not yet beyond having to be argued out of such calculations. Mensendi. Ned bowed his head, and when he lifted it, the strange weight in his chest had shifted as well. Like a pack, a man has settled better upon his shoulders. He could not promise himself that the road would not be cut by fire. He could only take one more step upon it and make the step sure. At dawn he went to the rooms where Sansa and Arya slept, and he stood between their beds and watched them breathe for a long time. Each breath a small proof that something in the world still listened to a father's prayers. Arya woke first, as she often did, with her hair a wild mane and her eyes bright. What? She said, blunt as her heart. We are going home, he told them. Not today. But the road is cleared as far as Rosby. From there, we will have men at every mile. You will ride with men I trust, and men Stannis trusts, and men the city trusts enough not to throw stones as you pass. You will not look back until you are beyond the neck. Now. Sansa sat up slowly, clutching at the sheet as if it were a robe at court. But, she began, and then bit the word in two, perhaps remembering something of the last week that had taught her that words are tools with edges and not ribbons to be tossed into the air for prettiness. We go to Mother. she said instead, and there was longing in it that made Ned's throat ache. "You go to Mother," he said, and laid his hand on her hair for as long as he dared. He did not look at Arya while he said it, because he knew that if he did, he would have to say something slightly different. Something like, "You go to Mother if you do not climb onto a roof and birth yourself into some trouble that will give me gray hairs." When he did look at her, he saw that she had her wooden sword in her lap and was stroking it like a cat. "Do not try to bring that through the gate." "I will not try," she said primly. And he believed her absolutely, which was why he added, "Nor will you hand it to Syrio and tell him to bring it. Nor will you tuck it in your saddle. Nor," she rolled her eyes in a great circle. "I will leave it with Syrio," she said. "He will keep it until I come back. And I will have a better one by then, a steel one with a name." "Now, what will you name it?" Sansa asked despite herself, pulled into the orbit of Arya's unruly certainty. "Home," Arya said. And for an instant even Sansa smiled. The day waited for the road to be taken. It would not be that day. There were lists to be made and wagons to be searched and men to be counted and paid. There were letters to be written that would go ahead of them like birds of good omen, telling toll keepers that if they laid hands upon the girls, their hands would be nailed to their own gates. There were oaths to be extracted from men who had sworn to Renly, and now must swear to Stannis, and then, for love of Ned, must further swear to put the safety of 2 girls above all calculations. There was the small matter of the queen who measured doors with her eyes. There was the larger matter of a west that had raised its banners and a river that had raised its own. Ned bent to the work, which is the way men like him pray. He turned his face from the place where fear lives and set it toward the place where road begins. He sent the Hound to ride a day's journey out and back, to frighten those who needed frightening into being helpful. He sent Barristan to speak to the High Septon and ask for a blessing to be placed upon 2 children. Not for the Sept's benefit, but for the benefit of those who would watch them pass and tell themselves, perhaps, that it was a sacrilege to fling stones at the holy. He sent Varys ahead of the ravens with whispers that said, "This road is watched by wolves and by stags and by a man who will remember your name if you do wrong." In the evening he went to the God's Wood that was not, and sat on the bench that had been placed there for the comfort of men who did not understand that gods do not sit. He put his hand upon the blackened stone face out of habit, and then took it away because it felt wrong. He spoke to the air anyway. "Let them go home," he said. "Whatever else follows, let them go home." A wind came through the courtyard then, a thin one, smelling of the river. It did not answer, but it moved the hairs on his arms, and it moved one leaf that had blow-thinned its way into this treeless sanctuary. And that was enough to stand in for an answer when none could be expected. When dawn came, it brought fog, and the fog made the city look almost kind. Men's voices muffled. The clank and chatter of the market sounded as if it were happening in another city that could not quite be reached. The girls' horses stamped and blew steam from their nostrils. Men checked buckles and looked to the roofs and the windows and the alleys and every place from which a story that began well could be turned by a single stone into a story that ended very badly. Arya swung into her saddle with a grim ease that made Syrio nod once. Ullum. As if the child had passed a test no one had announced, Sansa let herself be lifted and sat straight as a queen who knows which is the proper bee to put her hands. Ned put his hand upon each knee in turn lightly. "Go," he said, "and do not look back." They went. The fog took them and reshaped itself around them, as if to hide them from anything with ill will. The Hound rode at their left with his burned side away from them, as if it were a courtesy he knew how to offer. Men in Tyrell green rode at their right. Gold cloaks rode ahead. Barristan did not ride. He stood at the gate with his helm under his arm, and watched them go, and then turned and went to tell the king that the pieces upon his board had been removed without incident. Ned stood and listened to the fog, and for a long moment felt so light that he had to put a hand to the wall to remind himself that men of his size do not float away. Then the world returned in a rush of noise, and Littlefinger came with a sheet of parchment, and a smile, and Varys came with a rumor and a raised brow, and Stannis sent for him to break the question of what to do about the twins, given that a boy with a trout on his banner might be coaxed into doing a thing his father would not approve. And the day set its teeth in him again, and he gave it his flesh, because that is what the day demanded. And he gave it his flesh, because that is what the day. Far off, beyond fog and stone, along roads that had known wolf and stag and boar and brigand, two girls rode toward home with men at their flanks, who had been chosen because they could keep to a pace and keep their mouths shut and kill if they had to. Sansa counted landmarks she did not know the names of and made stories in her head to keep fear from sitting too comfortably. Arya counted ways to escape if the need came, and counted, too, the ways not to need to escape. The road went on. The day went with them. The story did not end. It only moved, like a river under ice, gathering itself for what it would be when spring comes. Okay. Fog held the lower city like breath in cold air, even though there was no cold to justify it. It pooled in the alleys and lapped at the knees of the horses as the column wound out through the King's Gate. The guardsman's leather creaked, and the iron bits of harness clicked and dripped with beads from the fog that looked like dew and tasted like the river. Lanterns bobbed along the line, islands of softer gold inside the gray. Ned walked beside the Hound for the first 50 paces, the cane ticking against the stones with its stern, familiar patience, until the press of men and horses took the girls into the mist ahead and left only the shapes of them, and then only the sound of hooves. "Go on, then," Sandor Clegane said, as if Ned had asked to come further. "I'll not be teaching your old legs how to march." Ned lifted his hand and let it fall, a gesture the fog swallowed, as if it had been a small stone. He wanted to say 100 things that would not change the world. "Go softer with them when you can. Go hard when you must. Do not make a game of frightening them, even if it amuses you. Do not let your rage choose for you." He said none of it aloud. "Bring me word from Rosby," he said instead. "Send back a rider when you have a roof over them." Sandor's burned lip twitched. "I'm not a maester," he said, "but I'll send you a bird if I see one too stupid to fly away from me." He nudged his horse and went, his bulk diminishing into shade, the dog's head helm at his saddle catching what little light there was, and winking like a single malign star. Ned stood a while in the gate's throat, letting men pass him in 2s and 3s. Tyrell green and gold cloak, mixed with duller browns and grays. The gold cloaks with their helms fog dulled to brass. He did not like the way the fog turned the familiar into the strange. He did not like any of this, to tell the truth. The city had a way of making every right thing feel as if a man were shaving with a knife that had been honed too fine. He turned when Barristan's quiet shoe came behind him. "They go clean," Barristan said. "For once." "For once," Ned agreed, and let himself have that small, sharp slice of relief. He did not walk away until the last lantern had vanished, until the last jingle of rain iron had been taken by the fog, until the gate guard's hoarse calls to one another had returned to their usual bored cadence, the way men sound when they have made a thing happen and want to pretend they had only been watching. The road north chewed the column down and made it smaller. Sansa's mare did not like the fog. She raised her head and chuffed and made her bit sing until Septa Mordane's hand found the mare's neck and stroked it with a firmness that was almost a scold. "A lady sits softly," the Septa murmured. "A lady calms her horse by the calmness of her person." Sansa tried to be calm by force. She drew in her breath in a way she had seen ladies do when they wanted to appear untroubled. It felt like holding a stitch in place with a pin and hoping the cloth would keep from raveling. The fog beaded her lashes and made the world eyelashes long. The ribbon at her throat grew damp and cold. She looked sideways, seeking a proof that someone knew exactly what to do, and found only Arya, whose hair had already escaped its ribbon and stuck in odd flags to her forehead, and whose hands sat easy on the reins like a boy's. Arya grinned, a quick slice of white and gray. Sansa's shoulder loosened despite herself. "Don't bounce," the Hound said back over his shoulder, which might have been to either or both. "If you bounce, you tell the horse you don't know what you're doing, and then she'll decide she knows better than you." "She doesn't. She's a horse." "Bah. I'm not bouncing," Arya said indignantly. and bounced twice, then clamped her jaw and tried to feel what the horse felt under her. The warm, steady strength of it, the way the shoulders rolled forward, and the barrel swayed. She had a sudden fierce desire to be very good at this, to show the Hound nothing he could use for mockery. The thought of him mocking Sansa made her ribs tighten like a strap. The Kingswood had its own fog, green-gray and thicker, and it stored sound strangely. Sometimes the clop of hooves on old pavers sounded far away, and sometimes it was inside a man's ear, as if his own blood had begun to wear iron shoes. The Hound rode with his head a little down and to the side, as if he were listening not for noise but for the absence of it. Twice he lifted his hand, and the column went still in a ripple, and men leaned from their saddles and stared at places in the trees where only birds watched with button eyes. "Boar," he said once, and his voice came back off the trunks and sounded like another man speaking. "Not you, pig. Stay under your bush." Later he said, almost to himself, "There." And a crossbowman slithered like a lizard down a trunk and landed at the foot of a ditch with his hands up, and his mouth making excuses that sounded the same as prayers. "Don't," the Hound told Arya when she started to turn her head to stare longer. "You look at men who would shoot you too long, you teach them your face." "My face is not a lesson," Arya muttered. "Everything is a lesson," he said, and let the crossbowman scuttle, head down, along a track various men had already learned and already marked to be watched. They put up at mid-morning beneath a stand of beeches, where the ground rose a little, and the leaves made a ceiling low enough to tame the sky. One of the Tyrell spearmen, he had said his name was Herod when asked, and had smiled to show he meant no harm, his mouth very white in his tanned face, brought Sansa a cup of watered wine, and stood at a proper distance while she drank. "It is not the reached wine," he said, apologetic, and Sansa smiled, because that was within her grasp even on a morning like this. Arya squatted and picked at the damp leaves to see what small lives hid under them. A beetle with a red dot on its back lifted its little black head at her and rotated as if it had a compass in it. "Do beetles have kings?" she asked Herod suddenly, because he had young eyes and would not be offended by odd questions. "In the Reach, everything that can be lorded is lorded properly," he said solemnly. "Old men sit on benches and tell it how." "Even beetles," Sansa said, surprising herself. "Especially beetles," Herod said gravely. "They are poor at making speeches, and so their lords make them for them, and give them better endings than they deserve. That is the way of lords and beetles everywhere." The Hound snorted. "Your old men can give my beetle speeches, long as they keep their hands out of my purse," he said, and bit into a heel of bread like a man biting a foe. "It's the purse that makes your lords, not the bench." "Damn?" Herod took that with the ease of a man used to heavier jests. "If you like," he said mildly. "We say benches because benches hurt less to sit on than coin." Rosby was a dark lump on the land in that light, its towers stout and unlovely, its banners hanging damp and refusing to lift. The Lord came to the gate because 1,000 city stories had taught him to expect this to be an odd hour and an odder company, and so this one did not disappoint. Arya thought his hair looked like the hair of men drawn badly by a scribe who had never seen hair before. Sansa thought his boots were very good and wondered where one bought such a polish in the country. The Hound kept his horse from trampling the man by the simple expedient of doing nothing at all but glaring at him. "Rooms," Sandor said. "Dry, not nice. Beer, not sour. A place for the girls away from windows." "They are Stark's girls," Herod added, which proved to be the key the lock wished. Rosby's servants flurried as if this had been the first wind they had seen in decades. The girls got a chamber that had a tapestry of a man with a hawk and a dog, and a deer that was not very good at being a deer. Its eyes were too human, and its body too sleek by half. Sansa ran her fingers over the weave, and felt the faint roughness under the old dye. "Someone made this," she said, half to Arya, half to herself. "Some woman with a needle. She had to decide what color the deer was, and how many stitches its neck should be, and whether to shade the shadow under its belly." "Bah." "Or a man," Arya said, the way she said many things, testing the possibility with her own mouth. Maybe a man did it, just to prove he could. And then everyone pretended to like it to spare his feelings. Syrio says men do that sometimes when they have too much pride and not enough sense. Now, Syrio says many things, Sansa said, but there was no sharpness in it. She had begun, without choosing, to fit Arya's odd people into a larger story. Syrio among them, like a little bird with a sword. Sandor left them halfway through the day with no flourish at all. He simply rode to where the girls' horses had been led out to take the air, and looked at them as if to make certain they were the same horses he had brought in, and then turned his own mount to the south. He saw the question darken Arya's face, and decided to answer it for the Viper before she turned it into a bite. "I'm not your nurse," he said. "You're north of the only city that knows how to make me angry. A day on the road in a town that doesn't lie as much as it breathes will keep you from anything I can keep you from that doesn't ride with banners. The men who go on with you know the roads they take. Try not to teach them to doubt you. Doubt's a disease. It spreads." "You're leaving us," Sansa said, and hated the plaintive lift that crept into it. She swallowed it down before it could swell. "I don't stay anywhere I'm not wanted," the Hound says. "I'm wanted in a lot of places for the wrong thing. Today, I'm wanted in the right one." He gave the mare's neck one flat slap, more like a command than a caress. "Sit your seat, little bird. Don't cry. You've nothing to be crying about." "Mesunda." "I am not," she began and stopped. "I will not cry," she said instead, and made it true by biting the inside of her cheek until it twinged. Arya did not say anything at all. She watched his back until it had become another thick piece of fog, and only then let herself say, very softly, "Good." The road felt thinner without him, as if a tree had been taken from a copse, and the sky had become a bigger thing. Herod's ease filled some of the empty space, and the gold cloaks' practiced insolence filled the rest. When they rode past a cluster of hovels where women turned to watch with bowls in their hands, the gold cloaks sat straighter and smirked, knowing exactly what they looked like from the outside, and liking the shape of it. Sansa found that she could not look very long at those women. Arya stared at them until a woman stared back with a sudden boldness, and then it was Arya who looked away first. The King's Road gathered itself out of the side roads with a sense of its own importance, a straight thing cut through fields and woods, old as kings whose bones fed the earth beside it. Slabs of dressed stone showed in places where the dirt had been eaten away. There were soft curves in the roadside grasses where carts had slid off and back again. The farther north they went, the less the fog crowded them. A wind rose, not much, enough to lift the hair off a sweaty neck. Sansa rode easier. Arya began to stand in her stirrups as they came up a rise, the better to see beyond. The gold cloaks swore at the wind with relief, as men do at a friend whose company has grown tedious. They slept one night at a holdfast that was not much more than a palisade and a square of beaten earth, with a little timber tower set in the corner like a jest. The holdfast men had that wary hospitality common to small forts, a readiness to be kind and a readiness to shut their gates if kindness proved too expensive. The captain, Sir Ottermore, he told them, proud to have the Sir called upon him, came and bowed in a way he had chosen from some memory of a court, and polished with a small pride. "You've had no trouble?" he asked Herod under his breath, as if trouble might be shy and flee if named. "None worth the naming," Herod said. "A crossbow without the nerve behind it. A badger with too much nerve. A woman who told us we had pretty horses, and then shut the door in her man's face when he wanted to sell us milk at twice the price. The gods kept the rest." "Gods do what they like," Sir Ottermore said, with a fatalist's shrug. "I do what I can. You'll take the inner room for the girls. There's a bolt that runs into the stone on both sides. It's not Winterfell, but it's not a ditch." He looked at the girls then, an honest look that took their measure in the old way. An assessment of how much they would drink and how much trouble they would bring. "You'll be north soon enough," he said. "The road is not the worst part." "What is?" Arya asked. "The waiting," he said. "Always the waiting. It makes men stupid. It makes women kind to men who don't deserve it." He shifted, a little embarrassed at having said that much. "Beg pardon, lady. My tongue gets away from me when I've been staring at a gate all day." "It is all right," Sansa said to Sir Ottomore's startled gratitude. They passed through the place where the Kingswood thins and men begin to talk with a different accent, where the little steads have thatched roofs that hold their circles of smoke, low as a cat crouched over its meal. A peddler came the other way with bells on his harness, and a hat that had once belonged to someone who believed in the hat. He told them in cheerful terror that there were lions in the road at night, honest-to-God's lions with manes like banners. "Not Lannisters," he said, so eager to be clever that he clipped his own joke in half. "Real lions. Real lions don't live here," Arya said. "Tell them that," the peddler said, and laughed so loud that the horse flicked its ears, offended. They came to the inn at the crossroads, with its leaning sign and its air of having seen too much of men and learned to be polite to their coin anyhow. The innkeep was a woman of middle years, with the younger woman's body underneath it. Hardened by work, her mouth set in that particular line that says a life is what it is, because I made it so. She greeted Herod with the semi-bow a southern trader gets, and the gold cloaks with a too bright cheeriness that told Sansa she had no love for them. "Bread," Herod said. "Cheese if it's not cocked. Meat if it's cut in this month." "Nem chander." "Bread then," the woman said, with a smile that had learned to be kind to men who were not the kindest. "And eggs. They're fresh. I know because they were under a hen this morning, and she pecked me bloody to prove it." She saw the girls then with her proper woman's glance, not too long, not too warm. The sort of glance a woman gives another man's children when they cannot be helped. "There's a room you can have that doesn't smell like beer. It smells like onions. Pick your poison. I'll send a girl to scrub the worst of the smell out while you sit." And they sat. Sansa discovered that the way benches are made at crossroads is very different from the way benches are made in keeps. She spent several minutes silently apologizing to her bones. Arya shifted restlessly until Herod put a hand lightly upon her shoulder, and she stilled, surprised to find herself responding to it at once, like a horse to a good hand. The door blew open, and a boy came in with a jerkin, the color of poor beer, and hair the color of good wheat. He looked at the gold cloaks and swallowed, and looked at the girls and swallowed again, and backed out so quickly that someone laughed. "Farm boys," one of the cloaks said. "They're all the same. Want to see, and don't want to be seen. Then they're all." That night, Arya heard men's voices under the window, and went to it and put one eye to the crack without thinking of whether Syrio would approve the move. She told herself he would, because Syrio would always want more ways to see. There were men in cloaks the color of nothing important, standing with their hands thrust into their belts like men who tell themselves they are not considering drawing, and will be surprised when they find they have drawn anyway. "A king's girls," one said, in the tone men use when they are talking about a sack of silver and trying to convince themselves it is heavier than it is. "They're not king's girls now," another said, and laughed into his hand. "They're just girls. You see this sword?" a third said, and Arya could hear the smirk. "If we show it to the gold cloaks, they'll lower their price by half because they're bored and want to play. If we keep it tucked under our cloaks and only show it to the man who likes girls with the right hair, he'll give us a purse that will knock the ring off a finger." "Then sour." Arya's knuckles went white around the window frame. She had a sudden urgent desire to be Syrio himself for one heartbeat. Not to be taught by him, but to be him. To feel the city like a pattern under her feet. She tried to breathe the way he had taught her, through the nose, with a soft throat. The men moved away, and the sound of their feet told her they did not walk like wolves, which was something. She backed away from the window, and only then let herself be scared. The Hound had not been wrong about doubt. It crept along the rafters like smoke. Sansa felt it, and set herself not to breathe it in. She took Septa Mordane's hand at bedtime, the way she had done when she was smaller, and the Septa squeezed her fingers with a fierceness that was almost pain. "A lady is brave by refraining from fear," the Septa said. Sansa wanted to tell her that this made no sense. The words came out instead as, "Yes, Septa," because habits make their own sense in a world where sense fails to. They left the next morning under a sky that had finally remembered how to be blue. The air felt like a cloth wrung out and hung up to dry. The men were in better humor for it, even the gold cloaks. One told a joke about a mummer with a hat full of mice that made even Septa Mordain snort before she caught herself. The road north of the inn lay straight as a promise and narrow as a man's mercy. Sansa tried not to think of it that way, and thought instead of the way Winterfell would smell when the first frost came and made the smoke from the chimneys sit properly. The rider Ned had sent from Rosby met them with news like bread still warm from the oven. The city had held its temper for another day. Stannis had asked precisely the number of questions Ned had told Herod he would. Littlefinger had brought back 2 3/4 of the lists he had promised. The Hound had arrived swearing at the fog, and then at the lack of it. Herod read the words and grinned like a boy. "Your father is good at this," he told the girls. "It's not a thing to be good at. But he is." Arya did not say the thing she wanted to say. That of course he was. That he had always been good at the bad things the world demanded from him. She did not say that the first time she had seen him kill, he had looked at the thing he had killed as if it had been a part of his own body cut away from him by mistake. She kept the words like stones in her pockets and walked on with them. In King's Landing the fog burned off the river and left a light that made men want to squint. It showed the city's pocks and cracks and scabs with brutal cheer. Stannis held court in a room that looked too ornate for him, the painted beams and gilded bosses wasting their finery on a man who had never wasted a word. He sat a little forward, not slumped like Robert had slumped, and not light like Renly would have sat, but as if the chair required some fighting with to make it fit him. Men came with petitions that began with "Your Grace" and then forgot themselves, and said "My Lord." He did not correct them, because he did not care for words, except inasmuch as they made men do things. He named Davos master of ships over the protests of a lord, who had thought his beard and his father's shipyards sufficient claim. He left Janos Slynt where he was, and watched him like a man watches a ferret in a coop. He signed writs that ordered alchemist stores to be sealed and reckoners of grain to be watched by men who did not like them. He listened to Pycelle's droning with the same patience he gave to a dripping Eve. He surprised Littlefinger by asking him to speak last, and surprised Varys by thanking him where one of his little birds had been whipped for knowing things a Lannister had thought safe. He let Barristan stand. He did not make him choose between one oath and another in front of men. Ned watched him with a care that had nothing to do with liking, and everything to do with the fact that the city rested upon this man's particular combination of iron and lack of imagination. It was not a comfortable place to rest anything. It was the place the day had given them. In the afternoon, an envoy from Highgarden arrived in a cloak that smelled faintly of crushed rosemary when he bowed, which is the sort of detail that tells you where a man slept the night before. He had Mace Tyrell's florid courtesy and Olenna Redwine's little slips of sharpness in equal measure. He kissed the king's ring with a humility an inch larger than insincere and said, "Your Grace, Lord Renly Baratheon sends greetings and begs leave to present to you at a time of your choosing certain arguments concerning the love the realm bears him and the advantage of settling the matter of the succession by means other than parchment alone. He asks that you note that the Reach stands firm for peace, for bread, and for the prosperity that follows in the wake of a smiling king." Mentorwansha. Smiling, Stannis said, as a man might say rotted. "Does Lord Renly send a letter that names him king?" The envoy's eyes made a courtly dance around truth. "He sends a promise of strength," he said, "and a marriage. He is to wed Lady Margaery within the week, with the blessings of half the South upon him." Ned did not let his face change. He had known. Of course, he had known. He had known the shape of that music the first time he saw Renly's face soften when he spoke the girl's name without speaking it. He let the envoy's words settle like flour dust, and then asked, in a voice that would carry only as far as it needed, "Does Lord Renly send grain?" "Grain," the envoy said quickly, glad to have a fact he could put down on the table like a coin. "Grain and wine for the city, and men to help unload and keep order, if your grace will accept them into your service and ensure they are paid from the proper account." Stannis looked at Ned, and for an instant, there was the glint of something almost like humor in that stony face. "He would feed my people and then make them his," he said. "He is not a fool. Tell Lord Renly the city eats, and eats without his banners. and that it will swear to me again as often as he likes to hear those words while he feeds his flatterers on the road." He leaned forward. "Tell him this, that I will hear any argument he wishes to make, so long as it does not begin with the word law. For that word belongs to me already." The envoy bowed as a man bows when he must not look pleased or displeased, and withdrew with his robe trailing like a field of green. When he had gone, Stannis rubbed at the bridge of his nose. "He will come," he said. "He will come because he likes to be seen. He will come because the Tyrells cannot keep a peacock and not show it. He will come because he thinks his smile will make my frown into a small thing." "Damn." "Let him come without his host," Ned said, "and let him come in a cloak with no antlers on it, and let him come to the sept and kneel and swear, and then let him make arguments after he has put his forehead to stone. If he can do that, if he can kneel where law lives and then rise and say peace, I will persuade the city to listen to him without jeering." "Then no." Stannis' mouth tightened. "He will not kneel," he said simply. "He would rather give the city 1,000 kisses than one bow. We will make our peace without him. And when he decides to make war, we will count how many men in this city love him more than they love their larders." Letters went out as they always did, skittering across the land like insects that bite only later. One went to Storm's End, to Courtney Penrose, summons thinly disguised as courtesy. One went to Old Town, to the Hightowers, where they knew how to pretend to weigh matters of honor, and were often merely weighing the yield of their vineyards. One went to Dragonstone's sept, and returned with a smell of smoke on it, and Ned did not ask. The Riverlands had settled into a pattern of grief. Little towns had their own small ways of surviving it, taking their ribbons off the saint statues and tying them around the throats of their boys to remind them to keep breathing. Hiding their grain and pretending to have none, kneeling in the dirt and praying to a god who had once seemed a domestic thing, and now became an idea men could kill for. Caitlyn Stark saw too much of all that on the road from the Eyrie. She had the Tully look about her, eyes like water on slate under cloud, hair that had kept its copper because she had refused to let it go, and a steadiness that came from being the daughter of a man who had kept his river within its banks for a long time by damming it with iron. Brynden Tully found her at dusk at a ford where the water had been churned to milk by horses' hooves. He rode in like a man who had spent too many nights in the saddle, and had not yet learned to love it. His mouth made a shape of grim delight that was not a smile and did not want to be. "Cat," he said, and the name came out like a promise when it left his mouth. "You look like a woman who has refused to weep for a week." "I am a woman who does not have the time," she said, and he leaned over, and the brief embrace looked like nothing at all to the men who watched, and everything to those two. "I thought you would be at River Run." "I was until they threw a ring around it that looked more like a noose," he said matter-of-factly. The boy Edmure fought like a man who had forgotten to sleep, and then he remembered to sleep on the wrong night. "He is in chains." He saw the flinch and put a hand on her arm. "He is not dead. He will not die while it is worth a lord's while to wave him from a ladder. I came out before the ring snapped shut to find wolves. The gods sent me you, which is better. And now, Robb is at Moat Cailin," she said. "The neck moves for him. He will be through in days." "The twins then," Brynden said. "Old Walder's stone to hop to the other bank. He'll want to be courted like a maid. He'll want a song. He'll want a girl promised him for his boy who can still sit a horse long enough to—" "Oh, uncle," Caitlyn said, dry enough to cauterize the jest. "He will want what he always wants. Something for nothing and nothing for something. We will give him words that look like something. He can put them in his pocket and show his wives as if they were jewels." Brynden's eyes twinkled a very small bit. "Do you want me to speak to him? I can tell him that if he doesn't open his gates proper, a pack of northern men will use them as firewood. I want you to look at him and make him remember that he has a man in his family," she said. "Words will do for the rest." They came to the twins under an afternoon that had a fever in it. The stones looked like teeth ground blunt by chewing the same thing for too many years. Old Walder sat like a particularly unhandsome spider in his web of sons and daughters, and bastards, and cringing courtiers, and when he saw Caitlyn, his mouth collapsed upon itself in delight. "Cat, cat, cat," he said. Come to bring me the north. Is that the bargain? Will you put the north in my bed and tuck it up just so? Bend. I have brought you courtesy, she said. You will send me kindness and we will call it even. He leered and licked cracked lips. Kindness, he said. I have a girl named Kindness. She's quick at her needle and slow at her table. His eyes ran over her in a way that would have terrified a girl and only irritated her. What will you give me for my kindness? Don't say thanks. Thanks is what children give. Thanks is what good men give, Caitlyn said. I have not come for thanks. I have come to promise you that if you open your gates and let my son pass, you will have a place at his table when he dines with kings. I have come to promise you that if my son fails, your gates will be the last his enemies take down, because I will give my word for your prudence. She said the last like a woman placing a coin she detested upon a counter. What else? Walder said, relentless. Boys dight. Girls. I have too many of both, and not enough of both. I want to marry one of your girls to one of mine. I want to show men at my hearth a thing to make them shut their mouths. I want winter to forget me. I want spring to sit on my lap. What do you have in your pocket for me, cat? Nothing but promises, cat. Damn the wand. My son will wed one of your daughters, Caitlyn said, and hoped the gods might forgive the way the words settled like stones in her mouth. You will have him for a son by marriage, as well as by war, and you will remember that when the song is made. She let the next promise be small enough to be swallowed easily. And when you have a grandson with tully eyes and stark stubbornness, you can nag him to your heart's content. That is a grandfather's right. Ha! Walder said, baring 3 yellow teeth in a grin that could not quite be called a grin. Ha hot. It was worth wheeling you in here to hear you say that, cat. Very well. Give me hostages to show you mean it. Give me 2 boys, or a boy and a man. Leave them in my tower until your boy has done what he will do. Leave a girl if you like. No. No. P. You always were no fun with girls. Leave me your man there with the fish on him. I can use a man who can still piss standing upright. Damn no. You have enough men who piss, Brynden said blandly. You could do with one who can aim. Walder cackled, as if someone else had said it, and it was rude of them. They left a pair of lads with frey bright eyes and 2 long arms that they said were the sons of a small northern house Caitlyn had never heard of, and the Freys counted their fingers afterward to make sure the North had not tricked them by leaving them more or less than 2. Then the gates opened like a reluctant mouth, and Robb Stark's army came through, streaming, dirty, pale-eyed, with their banners cracking like reminders in the wind. The great Jon rode at the head with a grin for every Frey he passed, and behind him came men who had left plows with straight furs, and wives with bigger mouths to answer a call that had been true for longer than any of them could count. Robb kissed his mother on both cheeks, and then looked over her shoulder as a boy does when he has a field. He must cross before the sun falls. Jaime Lannister sits with not enough men before River Run, he said in the tone men use when they have recited a list to themselves so many times the numbers have begun to sound like words. His father sits with more than enough between Harrenhal and the Green Fork. I will split the army. I will go west with the fast men and make a basket in the woods to catch a lion. Roose Bolton will go east and hold Tywin in a dance long enough to make him scowl. Nennetabandi. Roose Bolton dances like a man with nails in his shoes, Brynden said. He dances until the music stops, Robb said. He knows how to stop it late. Caitlyn looked at her son's face and saw a man not yet made and almost ready. Be careful with your baskets, she said, and when he laughed, she held his arms hard enough to make him look down, and then he did not laugh again, because a mother holds a thing in her hands that no lord does, and he remembered it in that moment. The Whispering Wood took Jaime Lannister the way the river takes men who do not respect how strong it is, suddenly, with no second chances. Caitlyn had never liked the Kingslayer. He wore disdain like a shirt and thought that made him clean. It was a private wicked pleasure that she did not let show that when they finally dragged him from his horse. spitting like a cat, and bloody and still handsome. He looked stunned by the fact that the world had refused for once to be charmed. Robb had been in the thicket where the horsemen crashed most thickly. His cloak was torn, and there was a scratch along his jaw that would be a scar a girl would like to touch someday, if there were any days in which touching would be for liking, and not for proof of life. He had the look men have after a first battle that has not killed them. Taller, thinner, water in his eyes that he will not admit is there. "Uncle," he said breathless. "We have him." "You have him," Brynden said, equally breathless and equally unwilling to say what sat in both their mouths, which was that this was a game piece heavier than all the others. Caitlyn walked up to Jaime Lannister and looked at him like a woman looks at a snake. "She has decided not to kill yet. My brother sits in a yard with Lannister men shouting at his gates," she said. "My eldest girls ride the King's Road with a troop who must be watched even while they sleep. My husband holds the city for a king who knows the law. You stood your men at River Run and thought yourself brave. Congratulations. Now you will eat what you have hunted." "Then now," he laughed, because he thought himself charming. "You are wasted in the north, Lady Catelyn," he said. "You should be in court, teaching your husband to make jokes. He knows enough not to laugh at you," she said, and turned away, because there is no profit in speaking to a man who has only ever admired his own voice. They broke the siege of River Run like an old crust. Men ran under the walls with ladders and were knocked off by stones. Men set fires that turned in the wind and burned the men who had set them. And then all at once the gate opened and men poured out who had not slept enough and had eaten horse meat and had learned to be magnificent because necessity is an excellent drill master. Brynden went through first, with the trout jerking on his breast, and behind him came Tully. Men who raised a shout big enough to make even the stones of Harrenhal flinch, and asked themselves whether perhaps they had chosen poorly. Afterward, in the great hall, Hoster Tully lay back on a chair piled with cushions, and watched with eyes that had once been clear, and now were not, as his son was brought in bound, and then unbound, and his sister kissed him and scolded him like a boy. He wheezed and smiled at once. "Cat," he said, and she turned, and the old man's hand went to her face with a tremble she pretended not to notice. "The river runs again." "It does," she said. "It runs toward the sea, and the sea runs toward justice. It will be a very long running." "Longer than I have," Hoster murmured, and shut his eyes. A tear escaped like a shy creature from a hiding place, and he pretended, with the dignity of an old lord in a world that loved young men, that it was a trick of the light. At Moat Cailin the air was different. The neck makes a smell all its own. Wet things and growing things, and the old things underneath that make the ground move of its own accord. The fort was half ruin and half monument. Its towers rose like teeth that had been chewed down and then varnished with old pride. The men there wore frog-green cloaks and had eyes that watched like frogs watch, taking everything in without moving. The girls rode in under a rain that did not fall much, but fell constantly, fine as breath. Hallis Malin met them under the lee of a wall, with his hat dripping into his collar, and his face doing nothing to show it irritated him. "Ladies," he said, and the word sounded less like court, and more like a good cloak put on to go out into worse weather. "You will be in this hole 2 days while we wait for more men from the east to come up. Then we go on with haste. Robb is through the twins. Lord Eddard writes that the city holds. The gods hold what they can. Then so." Sansa's breath went out of her as if it had found a hole to escape by. "Robb," she said, and then shut her mouth because it would not do to speak his name like a prayer here, where men would hear and judge her on it. Arya ran her palm along the slick old stone and felt where water had learned it. "Do men live here?" she asked. "Or only frogs?" "Men," Hallis said. "Men come here when they have had enough of other men and decide frogs are better. Some of them decide to go back and find other men again. Most don't. They turn into reeds that can hold a spear." He looked at Arya with a professional curiosity that took in the way she stood as much as the way she spoke. "You look like your aunt did when she was a girl." "What aunt?" Arya demanded. Lyanna, he said. She had a way of standing that made men want to stand straighter. He made it sound like a good thing, and a warning in equal measure. Sansa slept that night, and dreamed cold dreams that had less terror in them than the hot ones she had learned in the city. Arya did not sleep much. She lay awake and listened to the frogs and tried to count their rhythms as Syrio had taught her to count steps. She imagined that she was already home, and that she had a blade with a name and a weight that became part of her hand when it warmed. She wondered if the gods would mind if she asked them to make time into something she could run across and arrive earlier. Robb came 3 days later, not because he was meant to, but because the world had twisted in a way that allowed it. He was on his way north from the relief of River Run, with a detachment to see to matters in the neck that his scouts had reported falsely or not at all about. He walked into the old hall in an old ruin with his cloak wet and his hair raining droplets, and saw his sisters there, alive, with cheeks that had color in them. And he was for a moment a boy again, until the men around him remembered themselves and their mouths curved, and their feet shifted, and he turned back into a lord because that is what a brother must be when other men are looked. He embraced Sansa and said her name as if he had discovered a new way to form an old sound. He embraced Arya and laughed when she thumped his shoulder like a boy, and then hid her face in his jerkin because she had remembered just in time that she could not thump him and cry at once without letting the men think her one thing and deny her the other. "You're taller," he said to Sansa, astonished as if it had happened between the door and the embrace. "You look more like Mother. You look like—" He stopped, because he had been about to say "you look like a girl at court," and he had learned to swallow such words because they were like sweet wine in a place where men needed water. "I've been good," Sansa said, and then flushed because it sounded childish even to her. "I mean, I have done as Father said." "You always did," he said, and turned away to let his throat remember how to swallow. "Arya," he said then, and Arya looked at him with the look of a boy who has brought home a frog and wants his older brother to admit it is a prize. "You'll break this castle if you try to climb it," he said. "Please don't." "I won't," she said, and meant it in that moment, though later the walls would whisper to her until she did, which is what walls do to certain sorts of children. They rode on under Hallis Mullen's command with men who knew more of the bog and the secret little paths than any southern raider could ever learn in a year. Sansa found the movements of the bog as unnerving as she had once found the movements of men. Arya loved them because they required a body to be still and then sudden. Like a cat, they came out of the neck with the land rising under them and the air losing its damp net and becoming the thing that carries cold. Winterfell was there then, not as a thing seen but as a thing felt. A recollection in the air's taste, a prickle at the back of the neck that is not unfriendly. Maester Luwin met them in the yard with his chain glinting, and his eyes more tired than any child should be allowed to see. The sight of the girls undid him for the length of one breath. He put a hand to his mouth, and then remembered he was a maester and a man, and set his hand down and made it into a gesture of greeting. "Ladies," he said, and added softly, "my dears," in a way that did not cheapen either word. Hodor came in a hurry with arms like the trunks of young oaks and a smile that could make a room feel better about itself. He said Hodor, and then Hodor again, in 2 different tones that meant the 2 different kinds of joy. Summer ran into the yard from nowhere in particular, and skidded and slammed into Arya's knees, and then danced back and bowed and made that ridiculous rumble that is not quite a growl, and not quite a laugh. "Nymeria?" Arya blurted, stupid with hope, and then shook her head, scolding herself. "No. Dottie. Of course not. Summer. Summer." She crouched and put her hands to the wolf's ruff, and let the feel of the thick fur run through her fingers like water that is somehow solid. Sansa stood a moment with her hands very tight together at her waist, and then, with a small quick movement, reached to touch Summer too, once, briefly, as if she were ringing a bell. Old Nan came and looked them up and down, and made a noise with her mouth that could have been a scold and might have been a prayer. "I told him," she said to no one and everyone. "I told him you'd bring him home if you could, you old Stark." And she did not mean Eddard so much as she meant a line of men behind him that stretched farther back than any man could count. They slept under roofs that knew their breath and woke to air that smelled like fires burning the right wood. Sansa sat in the God's Wood where the face in the heart tree regarded her with no pity and no contempt, and felt something inside her body loosen into the shape it had been meant to take. The sept had taught her how to fold prayers. This place taught her how to leave them unfolded. Arya went to find a stick and turned around with a steel shortblade in her hands that Roderick Castle had produced with a scowl that was all for what the world would say and none for her. "If you are to have it, you will learn to keep it as if it deserves keeping," he said. "Which means you will polish it and oil it and not swing it like a child trying to swat flies." "I do not swat flies," Arya said. "I stab lions." She looked up, guilty. "Not real lions. Not the one in the men's coats. Not really." "You will stab straw," Roderick said. "And if a lion walks into the yard and lays down under your blade and asks you to shave him for the summer, you will put the blade away and call a wiser man than you to decide whether lions ought to be shaved." She did not entirely understand the last, but she nodded as if she did, because that is how children become the sort of people who can eventually decide such questions themselves. Letters went to King's Landing with little bits of Winterfell tucked in them by accident. The iron smell of the forges, the faint, ever-present smoke of the kitchens, the hair's summer shed on everything. They brought back answers that had none of that in them. Ink and wax, and the weight of a city trying to hold itself separate from the rest of the world, long enough to make law into something that mattered. Ned wrote to Sansa and Arya the way a man writes to his own heart when it has been removed from his chest and taken north, too carefully, too sparingly, as if words could be wasted. He wrote to Robb like a lord to a lord, and once like a father to a boy, and that once made Robb sit with the letter a very long time before folding it, as if folding would keep it from wearing out. In the city, a new rhythm took hold, and men grudgingly admitted that it was easier to breathe in than the last one. The bread arrived at the hour written, not the hour desired, and that was better than it arriving at no hour at all. The gold cloaks learned that if they took too much, there were places where men would remember their names and tell them to men with longer names. The Queen learned that confinement is a room with fewer doors than a prison and more mirrors. She learned that her children were loved most deeply by men who did not love her at all, and that this was a cruelty the city had devised especially for her. She sent more letters. She sent less hope. She watched the river and counted boats in a way that only made sense to a woman who had once told herself that the world exists to be arranged around her comfort. Renly was married at Highgarden under vines heavy enough to have seemed like metaphors to a man who loved such things. He did not need them. Half the South loved him loudly enough to stand to reason without poetry. Margaery Tyrell smiled with the subtlety of a girl who has learned early not to let every thought be seen. She put her hand in Renly's and let the whole of the garden reflect that gesture back 100 times so that men felt they were swimming in it. The Tyrells counted gifts as a baker counts loaves, and forgot not a single one. Swords signed themselves over to Renly with the gleeful generosity of men who have decided at last to choose charm over justice and think the gods will be flattered into blessing their choice. Loras Tyrell rode in circles around the party's edge like a dog who longs to be let off his leash and will knock over a tablecloth if someone does not check him. "Stannis has the law," Mace Tyrell said once with a sigh, in a place where the walls themselves were family and would not betray him. "Our boy has the music." Lena Redwine, sitting beside him with her needle moving, did not look up. "Music fails when men grow hungry," she said. "We have given them bread. We can give them songs after." Now, Renly's letters to the city became more elaborate and more careful to be flattering while being in no way conciliatory. He asked, with a politeness that had only a little acid in it, whether the king would care to receive his brother's homage, if the word homage were understood in its natural sense of men loving a thing because it loves them back. Stannis wrote a one-sentence reply. "The law does not love," and a second, "I will not negotiate with an argument that has no words." Ned did not send either letter exactly as written. He sent versions that had edges sanded off and still cut. From the west came crows whose feet were sticky. They brought names of mills burned and men hanged in their orchards. Boys taken to carry pikes behind men who liked how the boys' legs looked beneath the weight. From the east came word from Roose Bolton that made a man's skin prickle. A victory that did not feel like one. Bodies laid in rows like bundles of cane. A count of dead that did not add up to a song. Bolton wrote, like a man who would like to be admired for hating the necessary, less than other men. From the south came tidings of Renly's brilliance, which was to say his ability to make men forget for an hour why they had come until he reminded them himself. He took Storm's End not with a ladder, but with a ladder made of promises. He did not assault. He smiled, and somehow the men inside felt the wind blowing the right direction and decided the door ought to be open. Courtney Penrose scowled from a balcony and scowled from a gallows within a month. It did not matter if the city approved. It mattered that men saw the rope and told themselves the knot had not been tied too tightly. Ned paced the road between Stannis and the city, like a man who keeps two oxen from goring each other while they share a yoke. Melisandre wanted a pyre. She always wanted a pyre. The Sept wanted a procession. It always wanted a procession. He gave neither the exact shape it asked. He gave each a thing that could be interpreted as triumph by those who required triumph to kneel. When he slept, his sleep smelled of smoke and incense and the sea, and it did not rest him as deeply as a Winterfell night under the garrulous sigh of pines. Once, not long after the girls had reached Winterfell, a small thing happened that changed much. A boy slipped a knife into a loaf of bread at the market, a trick meant to slit a guard's palm for the price of a little show. The Hound caught him by the scruff and lifted him and asked him his name very softly, and the boy dissolved into a story about his sister and a debt and a man with a finger missing on his left hand. Sandor listened, and then set the boy down and walked through 3 alleys tracking a smell he could name like any dog, and came upon a man with 9 fingers and a knife like a fish's belly. He took the knife away and gave it to the boy and said, "Cut bread with it," and then he took the man's hand and broke the fingers that had not been missing. The boy cried. The 9-fingered man cried louder. Sandor looked at them as if they were both, in their own ways, stupid. Barristan came upon this at the corner of a street where fish guts lay steaming in the gutter, and he watched without a word and then said mildly, "That was not the law." Sandor said, "It will keep the blood inside bread for a week," and walked away with the air of a man whose sins are measured in better scales than the city owns. "You cannot hold this city without him," Varys said later that day, as if he were remarking upon the weather. "You will not love him, but you will need him. That is a truth about a great many things." Ned grunted, because agreement would have pleased Varys and disagreement would have been a lie. He watched Sandor from a window the next morning, as the Hound walked along a line of carts, and looked for a pattern only he could see, and he wondered in a very practical way how many men like that one might exist in a realm like this. Not enough. There are never enough of any breed, good or ill. The girls sent letters from Winterfell that were alternately too long and too short, as children's letters are, Sansa's full of descriptions and the names of women who had been kind or stiff, of food she had longed for and found to be less poetic than she remembered, of the way the gods' wood smelled when the snow came early to dust it, arias full of truths that read like untruths written by a boy bragging. "Today I touched the heart, and it did not bite me. Today I learned to roll when I fall, and it made me laugh. Today I climbed where Roderick said not to, and then came down where he said not to, and made him swear, because he loved me and did not know what to do with it." Ned read these letters with a care bordering on superstition, as if to miss a word would be to miss an omen. He copied lines into his mind, and walked around with them, like charms sewn into the hem of a child's coat. In all of this there was a sense, indefinable and pervasive, that a thing had been averted, and another had been invited. The city had not burst into flame. Stannis had not burned a hall to prove that men could learn fear from him as well as from nature. Renly had not come in with a smile and turned it single. Tywin had not ridden to the gates and demanded the heads of those who had slighted his children and his name. Each of those knots, stacked, made a sort of precarious positive. And yet, the West kept bleeding, and men began to build their grief into shapes they could carry. A song about a miller's wife with a brave tongue. A prayer to a foreign god told in a corner of a tavern, where men would have been beaten for it last year, and laughed at for it the year before. The Reach grew fatter on good weather and good guessing. It began to plan for 2 futures and purchase grain accordingly, which is the Reach's particular genius. The North gathered itself in the way it does when the weather is about to turn, not merely with cloaks and cords, but in the hearts of men, which hardened to meet the hardening ground. The Vale watched. The Vale is good at watching. Dorne smiled in a way that is not a smile, and sent 2 troops of dancers north with skirts that hid messages in their hems. When the first snow fell in Winterfell that year, early and ill-humored, Summer turned his face into it, and sneezed explosively, and then pretended he had never sneezed. Sansa stood in the Godswood, and felt the snow touch her cheeks, and not melt at once. And she lifted her face because it made her feel like a girl in a tale. And for once the tale was not about a queen or a princess, but about a girl who came home. Arya ran until her lungs burned, and then stood panting with her hands on her knees, and claimed she had only been racing the snow. The raven from King's Landing that night brought nothing more dramatic than a question about tariffs on winter oats for the bakeries of the Street of Flour. Lewin sat and wrote a reply with a pen that had been cut too sharp, and blotted his paper when it scratched. "Even a city must eat," he said. "Even a king must count." Ned, sitting in the Tower of the Hand in his chair that had learned his shape, read Robb's letter about River Run and the Kingslayer, and folded it very carefully. He read Caitlyn's note, 3 lines, all weight, and set it beside the first as if they were pieces of a game that he intended to win by making the pieces be patient. He read Stannis's brief commands and Varys' long reports and Littlefinger's neat mockeries and Barristan's simple statements, and then, because none of that could be absorbed until a man had let his mind be quieted by something it understood, he closed his eyes and in the space behind them, watched his daughters step from the saddle in Winterfell's yard, again and again, the way a man will press his thumb into a bruise to see whether it still hurts. It did, and he was. The city slept that night more deeply than it had in months. The river was quiet, not with an unnatural stillness, but with the ordinary lull of boats tied, and men gone home to arguments and embraces. The sept had fewer candles lit than was its habit, because the acolyte who trimmed the wicks had fallen asleep sitting up and his fellow had let him. In the Red Keep, the Queen dreamed sharp. Odd dreams and woke with her mouth tasting of iron, and told herself she had bitten her tongue in sleep. In Highgarden, Renly dreamed of a hall full of people standing to toast him, and then felt the toast's heat become a heat he could not drink, and woke with a hand on his chest, and a wife's hand on his arm, and laughter in his mouth, and did not tell anyone that the laughter had not been as comforting as he had intended. In Dragonstone, Melisandre stood before a low basin of water, and watched it steam, and told herself that steam is another kind of smoke, and that smoke is another kind of truth, and she told herself that the shadows on the wall had begun to look very much like antlers, and not enough like a crown. In the cold north, in a Godswood that was not Winterfell's, a boy in black, who had not yet sworn all the words he would swear, put his hand to bark and felt, for the length of a catch of breath, that the tree's skin was warm. The road to war runs under every city and every keep, a thing men do not always see because they build their lives upon the ground, and tell themselves the ground is the only thing that matters. If a man goes down into the tunnels of it, he finds that law and laughter and hunger and pride all have their own branches, and all led into the dark. Eddard Stark had chosen which branch to take at the beginning of this tale. He had followed it with a care that made every hour heavier than the one before. The branch had not yet ended. It might never end, because law is less a road than a habit. He held to it anyway. He would hold to it when Renly came with music. He would hold to it when Tywin came with iron. He would hold to it if Stannis tried to light it on fire to see whether it would burn more cleanly that way. He would hold to it the way a man holds the hilt of a sword that the gods had set in his hand, not because he had wanted it, but because no one else had the right to keep it safe. And in the north, 2 girls slept, and in their sleep, one dreamed of a feast in a hall where candles did not smell of rancid fat, and one dreamed of a river that had ice growing on its edges, and a log that could carry 2 children to a place where men would not stare at them with measuring eyes. One turned in her sleep and smiled. The other turned and bared her teeth. The wolves outside stirred in their dreams and made small sounds that men can never decide whether to be afraid of or comforted by. The snow fell not as menace, but as a habit. The night held a little longer than it needed to, and the day that came after it did not immediately break anything. That is victory sometimes, and a man who has learned the city's ways knows when to take such victories into his hand and hold them like coals, burning and useful.